Daniel Whitmore ripped the diamond necklace from a locked drawer, threw the empty velvet box at his wife's feet, and snarled, "Your grandmother's dead, so tonight my woman wears the ocean's tear to your family's ball. Smile at the door like a good little hostess." Then he seized Evelyn's wrist, twisted it until she gasped, and hurled her hand aside like garbage. "You'll stand there and watch." He walked out laughing. He believed he had just broken her. He had no idea he'd only armed her, that the woman he'd humiliated would descend that ballroom staircase and burn his entire empire to the ground before the music stopped. Before we go one step further, if you believe that a woman should never let a man burn down everything she loves and then walk away laughing, please subscribe to this channel right now and stay with me all the way to the end, because what Evelyn Carter is about to do will leave you speechless. And do me one small favor. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight, so I can see just how far this story travels before it's over. Evelyn set the cup down without a sound, and that the silence was the first thing anyone who truly knew her would have noticed. Not the trembling hands, not the tears, just a stillness so total that the hum of the refrigerator seemed to swell into the space where her fury should have been. "You gave it away," she said. It was not a question. Daniel finally lifted his eyes, and what she saw in them was worse than guilt. It was boredom. It was sitting in a vault, Evelyn, doing nothing. At least now it's on a living woman's neck instead of locked in the dark like everything else in this family. "It belonged to my grandmother." "Your grandmother's been dead 9 years. He said it the way a man mentions that the milk has gone sour. The dead don't get to keep the pretty things forever. The living need them more." "Who is she?" He smiled. God help her, he actually smiled. "Does that matter now?" "It matters to me. Madison." He said the name the way a boy says the name of a shiny new toy, proud careless, waiting to be congratulated. Madison Cole. She's 26. She's ambitious. She's fun. She doesn't spend her whole life organizing dinners for people who already own the world. She makes me feel alive. He looked her dead in the eye. "When was the last time you made me feel anything at all?" There it was, the knife driven in with a smile. And Evelyn, who had spent 11 years of marriage smoothing over his tempers, defending him to her late father, building with her own hands the financial machine that turned his little startup into an empire, simply tilted her head the way she might if he'd remarked on the weather. "Alive," she repeated softly. "I see." "Don't." His voice sharpened. "Don't do the wounded silent thing. I know that look. That's the look you give the caterers when the shrimp comes out wrong. I'm your husband, Evelyn. I'm not one of your vendors." "Are you?" she said. "Still." That stopped him, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for something uncertain to flicker behind his eyes. Then he waved it off the way he waved off everything inconvenient in his life. "I'm skipping the ball Saturday." And there was the second blow landed fast, because he clearly thought the first one hadn't been enough. "The Crescent Moon Ball," she said. "Whatever it's called. I've got things in the city. Real things. You'll run it. You always do. Smile for the cameras, shake the right hands, make the Carter name look eternal for one more year. It's the one thing you're genuinely good at. My grandmother founded that ball, Daniel. And your grandmother's gone. See the theme forming?" He said it lightly, almost pleased with himself. "You'll handle it, alone. Tell people I'm in San Francisco if they ask. You're good at telling people things." Evelyn thought about the Crescent Moon Charity Ball, the way a soldier thinks about a flag she has sworn to defend. 4 generations of Carter women had stood at the center of that room and raised millions for children who had nothing. It was not a party. It was a covenant. And her husband had just told her he'd rather spend that night with a 26-year-old than stand beside his wife at the single most sacred evening of her family's year. "All right," she said. "I'll handle it." He blinked. That more than anything seemed to unsettle him, the ease of it. That's it. No speech. No, "How could you?" No tears. "Did you want tears, Daniel?" "I wanted—" He stopped. He didn't actually know what he wanted. He had rehearsed a fight in his mind, a fight he could win, a fight where her weeping proved he was right to leave. He had not rehearsed this. "I wanted you to feel something." "I feel a great many things," Evelyn said. "You're simply not going to see any of them." He stared at her a moment longer, Then he grabbed his coat off the stool, and at the door he turned, and for one instant he looked almost like the young man she'd married, the one who used to call her father Sir, with genuine nerves, the one who once told her that the smartest thing he'd ever done was marry a woman smarter than himself. "You know what your problem is," he said. "You never needed me. Not really. A man needs to be needed, Evelyn. Madison needs me." "Madison needs your money," Evelyn said gently. "There's a difference. You'll learn it eventually." The door closed, and she stood alone in the kitchen of a penthouse that had cost more than most towns holding an empty velvet box, and she did not cry. She had made herself a promise, somewhere in the last 3 minutes, that Daniel Whitmore would never again cost her a single tear. Tears are for what you lose, and you cannot lose a man who is never truly yours. The phone rang 40 minutes later. Margaret Sinclair, the woman who had read the tea leaves of New York society for 30 years and had never once been wrong. "Tell me you already know," Margaret said, no hello, "that my husband is sleeping with a 26-year-old named Madison Cole. I found out this morning, over coffee. He gave her my grandmother's necklace, Margaret. He slid the empty box across the counter like he was handing me a grocery receipt." A silence. The particular silence of a woman throwing out everything she'd planned to say and starting over. "He gave a 26-year-old the ocean's tear." "Yes. Evelyn, listen to me and listen carefully, because I need you to hear what I'm about to say and not what you want it to mean." Margaret's voice dropped into something cold and precise. "The affair is not the story. The affair is the smoke. I have been hearing whispers all week, and I refuse to believe them. But if he gave that girl the necklace, then it's all true. Daniel isn't just cheating on you. Daniel is stealing from you." Evelyn walked slowly to the sofa and sat, because some sentences require sitting. "Say that again." "The loft in Soho, the cars, the jewelry that girl posts on her little accounts, the private jet you thought was a company expense. Somebody is paying for all of it, and it is not Daniel's paycheck, because Daniel doesn't take a paycheck, he takes equity. Equity doesn't buy a 26-year-old diamonds on a random Tuesday." Margaret paused. "You need to look at the trust, and you need to bring in Henry, tonight." The name dropped into Evelyn's chest like a stone into a well. Henry Caldwell, executor of the Carter Family Trust, a silver-haired, iron-spined man who had guarded the family's fortune for 3 generations with a devotion that bordered on the sacred. "You think Daniel got into the trust?" Evelyn said. "I think a man who feels entitled to your grandmother's necklace feels entitled to your grandmother's money. Entitlement doesn't stay in one room, Evelyn. It walks the whole house, opening every door it finds." Henry Caldwell arrived at the penthouse at 7, precisely on time, as he had arrived precisely on time to every meeting for 40 years. He took one look at Evelyn's face and set his briefcase down without a word of greeting. "You've heard something," he said. "I've lived something. Sit, Henry, and tell me the truth, all of it, no matter how much you believe it will hurt me. I am not a girl who needs shielding anymore. I am the head of this family now, whether I wanted the job or not." The old man looked at her for a long moment, and something in his stern face gave way, because he had known her since she was a child in pigtails, hiding under her grandmother's desk, and he had wondered for years when this woman would finally arrive. Here she was. 3 months ago. He began lowering himself into the chair. "Daniel came to me. He asked about the discretionary liquidity provisions in the trust. He said the company needed a short bridge loan against future equity standard practice, he said, and that your father had always understood these things. He was very smooth, Miss Carter, very persuasive. Don't call me Whitmore, ever again. Carter." "Miss Carter," Henry corrected and inclined his head. "I told him no. I told him the trust does not lend to private ventures. It never has. Your grandmother wrote that rule into the founding documents in her own hand in ink I watched dry." He smiled, and he thanked me, and he left. Henry's jaw tightened. "And then he went around me." "How?" "There is a co-trustee provision, a relic. Your father added it decades ago so that if he were ever incapacitated, a second signature could authorize the movement of capital. When your father passed that role, transferred by the plain language of the document to—" Henry stopped. "To his son-in-law," Evelyn finished, and the cold spread up from her stomach into her throat. "To Daniel. To Daniel." Henry opened the briefcase and laid a single folder on the desk, and Evelyn looked at it the way one looks at a coffin. Over the past 90 days, a series of transfers have moved out of the discretionary fund, each one small enough to slip beneath the audit threshold, each one legal on paper because the man who signed them holds a role he never should have been handed. His voice dropped. The total as of this morning is $14 million. The number hung in the air of the study like smoke that would not clear. 14 million, Evelyn said. 14 million. Of my family's money. Money meant for hospitals, for scholarships, for children who will never know our name. She heard her own voice flat and steady, and it frightened her a little. Spent on a loft, and a girl, and a necklace that once sat against my grandmother's throat. Yes. Evelyn stood and walked to the window, and below her Manhattan glittered like a jewelry box. Someone had knocked to the floor, and somewhere down in that spill of light, her husband was laughing with a woman half his wife's worth and none of her spine. And Evelyn Carter felt something happen inside her chest that she had never felt before. Not heartbreak, not shame. A cold, clean, complete calm. The calm of a woman who has at last stopped hoping. "Henry," she said without turning, "how much of the trust does Daniel actually understand?" "Very little. He understands that it is large. He does not understand how it breathes." "And you?" The old man almost smiled. "Miss Carter, I helped write half of how it breathes. Your grandmother and I built those covenants together over 20 years. There are cross-default triggers, clawback clauses, and loan acceleration provisions in that instrument that your husband has never read and would not comprehend if he had. He believes he found a loophole." Henry closed the folder softly. "He walked into a trap that has been waiting 60 years for a man exactly like him." Evelyn turned. "Then let me be clear about what I want. I'll say it once. I do not want a divorce attorney. I do not want a settlement. I do not want the tidy story where he keeps his empire. I keep my dignity, and we tell the world it was a peaceful parting of two busy people." Her eyes were dry and steady and cold as the harbor in January. "I want everything he built on my family's stolen ground returned to the ground. I want it legal, sealed, and permanent, so that no lawyer on earth can ever undo it. And I want it done on my timing, not his." Henry Caldwell had served 3 generations of Carter women. He had watched the grandmother crush a rival bank without ever raising her voice. He had watched the father face down a Senate committee and stroll out smiling. But in 40 years, he had never seen anything quite like the woman standing before him now, and he understood with a small and startling thrill of joy that the 4th generation had finally come into her strength. "When?" he asked. "Saturday, the crescent moon ball." His eyebrows rose. "That is very fast." "He's planning something for Saturday, Henry. I can feel it in my teeth. He didn't tell me he was skipping the gala because he's skipping the gala. He told me so that I'd relax, so that I'd stand at that door greeting 600 people exposed unarmed, expecting nothing." She smiled the same smile she'd given Daniel across the island that morning, the smile he should have feared. "He's going to bring her. He's going to walk that girl into my family's most sacred night, wearing my family's most sacred jewel, and unveil her to all of New York as the future. And he's going to do it while I'm standing there holding a clipboard." "You can't know that for certain." "No," Evelyn agreed, "which is why I'm going to make certain tonight." She had never done it in 11 years, but that night after Henry left, Evelyn walked into Daniel's private office, the locked room he was certain she had never entered, and sat at his desk and typed in the passcode. Of course she had the passcode. A wife always has the passcode. Men simply cannot imagine that their wives are paying attention. She opened his tablet, the same tablet on which days earlier she had glimpsed the single line that started everything thinking about last night come to Soho. "I'll wear only the necklace," and now she read all of it. Months of it. And it was worse than betrayal. It was contempt. Message after message in which Daniel spoke of his wife the way a man speaks of an old car he's finally ready to trade. "She has no idea. She thinks I'm in San Francisco half the week. She'll run her little charity thing and I'll be with you." And Madison hungry and cruel in the specific way that only the young and beautiful can be cruel, feeding it back to him. "When are you telling the Ice Queen it's over? I want to wear the necklace in front of her. I want her to watch. Promise me she'll be there. She'll be there, Daniel had written. She hosts it. She has to be. That's the best part. That's the best part. Evelyn read those 4 words 3 separate times. Then she set the tablet down precisely where she'd found it, angled exactly as he'd left it, and she sat in the dark of her husband's office and did not weep. She had made a promise. She kept her promises. It was one of the many differences between herself and the man she'd married. But there was more on that tablet than cruelty, because scrolling further, hunting now with a colder eye, she found the thing that turned a wounded wife into an executioner. A message from Daniel to a man named Peter Vance, his chief financial officer. Move the Q3 investor call to next Monday. I need the trust bridge to clear and post before anyone sees the balance sheet. Keep it off the deck. If the auditors ask, it's a related party loan fully documented. It isn't, but they won't check until January. Evelyn read it twice. Then she took out her phone and photographed the screen once, twice, 3 times, timestamps and all, and she felt the last soft thing inside her go quiet and still, like a lake at midnight. He hadn't just stolen from her. He had lied to his own investors about it. He had built the theft into the bones of his company and gambled that no one would look until winter. He had, without knowing it, handed his wife not just a grievance, but a weapon, the kind of weapon that does not end marriages, the kind that ends men. She whispered it to the empty room. Oh, Daniel, you didn't just cheat. You committed fraud, and you did it against a woman who owns the paper you signed it on. She began at 11 o'clock at night to build the thing that would destroy him, and she built it with 3 calls. The first was to Margaret Sinclair. It's all true, Evelyn said. 14 million, and there's more. He's hidden it from his own investors, falsified it as a related party loan. I have it in his own words. Margaret was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had gone very soft, which anyone who knew her understood was the most dangerous thing she could possibly become. Then we don't just embarrass him, darling. We erase him, but we do it correctly. We do it so cleanly that not one soul in that room can call it a jealous wife's revenge. We make the whole city watch the truth arrive, and we let them do the destroying. All you have to do is open the door. He's going to try to humiliate me at the ball, Margaret. I know. A pause. Good. Let him. There is no better disguise for a hunter than a woman everyone believes is the prey. The second call was to Henry Caldwell, who answered on the first ring at 11:30 and did not sound the least bit asleep. He falsified it to his investors, Henry, called it a documented related party loan. It isn't documented, and you know it isn't. She heard for the first time in 40 years of acquaintance Henry Caldwell laugh a low, dry, delighted sound. Miss Carter, do you understand what you've just told me? A misuse of trust capital is a family matter. We could handle it in a quiet room, but misrepresenting it to investors and auditors, that is no longer between him and you. That is between him and the federal government. You don't need to ruin your husband. You only need to hand the truth to the right people at the right hour and step back. Then have everything ready. Notarized, sealed, executable the instant I give the word. The clawback, the loan acceleration, the withdrawal of the trust's backing from his credit lines. All of it primed to fire on Saturday night. It will take me until Friday. You have until Friday. And the authorities. Evelyn looked out at the sleeping city. Not yet. The authorities come last. First the room. First the whole city has to see. I want him to feel it socially before he feels it legally. I want him to understand in front of everyone whose opinion he's ever chased exactly what he threw away, and then I want the doors to open. You are, Henry said quietly, very much your grandmother's granddaughter. No, Henry, Evelyn said. I'm worse. She forgave people. I've decided I won't. The third call went across an ocean to a man in Paris whose name spoken in the right rooms still made grown women weep. Lucien Moreau, a designer who had not cut a single gown in 3 years, who had turned away duchesses and heiresses and the wives of 2 presidents, and who answered his phone at 5 a.m. Paris time because the name Carter was one of the last on earth that could still command him. Lucien, it's Evelyn. A pause, then the dry, amused voice of the old master. The last time you needed me, chérie, it was your wedding. I made you a gown that put a billionaire on his knees. I remember. And now, Evelyn watched the lights of Soho far below where her husband slept beside the woman he'd bought with her grandmother's money. And when she answered, her voice was as steady and cold and beautiful as the diamond that would very soon sit back inside its rightful vault. Now, I don't need a gown that puts a man on his knees, Lucian. I need one that makes an entire city forget he was ever standing in the room. Lucien Moreau went silent. Then he laughed low, delighted, dangerous, the laugh of an artist handed the commission of a lifetime. "Ah," he breathed, "so it is that kind of ball. Tell me everything, chérie. Tell me who we are burying and how deep." She saw Daniel one more time before Friday. Thursday evening he came home to change clothes, breezing through the penthouse as if it were a hotel he half-owned. She was waiting in the sitting room, calm, a glass of wine untouched at her side, and he stopped when he saw her, because she was not supposed to look like that, composed, rested, almost content. "You're in a mood," he said, wary. "Am I? You're not fighting me. It's strange. I keep waiting for you to blow up." He loosened his tie. "It's almost like you don't care." "Would you prefer that I cared, Daniel?" He didn't answer that. Instead, testing the ground, he said, "I've been thinking. About Saturday. Maybe I'll come after all. Show my face. It's good for the company being seen at these things. Investors like it." Every muscle in Evelyn's body went still. There it was. He was going to come, just as she'd known. But she let nothing show, not a flicker, and she said only lightly, "Of course. It's always good to be seen. Bring whomever you like." He narrowed his eyes. "You don't mean that." "I mean," Evelyn said, lifting her wine at last and taking one slow sip, "that Saturday is going to be an unforgettable night for everyone in that room, and I would hate for you to miss it." "You're being weird." "I'm being gracious. There's a difference. You'll learn it eventually." She smiled at him over the rim of the glass, and for one instant, just one, Daniel Whitmore felt something crawl up the back of his neck that he could not name, some ancient animal warning that he was standing much closer to the edge of something than he understood. But he was a man who had never in his life trusted his instincts over his arrogance, and so he shook it off exactly the way he shook off everything. And he finished dressing and he left. At the door he paused. "Try not to embarrass the family Saturday," he said, "for your grandmother's sake." And Evelyn Carter, alone in her sitting room, raised her glass an inch toward the closing door. "For my grandmother's sake," she said softly to the empty room. "Every last inch of it, Daniel. Every last inch." Friday came. Henry Caldwell arrived at the penthouse at noon with a leather portfolio thick as a Bible, and inside it lay the end of Daniel Whitmore's world, translated into the patient, merciless language of law. Clawback authorizations, loan acceleration notices, cross-default declarations, cross-referenced and countersigned. A letter drafted and awaiting only her signature to be delivered to the regulators the moment she said the word. Every page was a tooth in a jaw that had been waiting 60 years to close. "Once this executes," Henry said, laying the pen beside the portfolio, "there is no reversing it. His credit lines collapse the instant the trust's backing is pulled. His covenants trigger in a chain. His investors will be legally notified within hours, and once they read what he called a documented loan, they will run for the doors, and the fraud will surface on its own. You will not have to accuse him of anything, Miss Carter. You will simply have to let the truth stand up in a room and speak." Evelyn looked at the pen for a long moment. "Are you certain?" Henry asked more gently. "Truly certain. Once it's done, the man you married ceases to exist. There is no version of this where he keeps some quiet corner of dignity. He loses everything, his company, his freedom, his name." Evelyn thought of the empty velvet box sliding across the marble. She thought of, "That's the best part." She thought of a 26-year-old wanting her grandmother's throat diamond so she could watch the Ice Queen's face. "He made his choice standing in my kitchen," she said. "I'm only making mine." And she took the pen and one by one, without a single tremble in her hand, she signed her name where the arrows pointed. Evelyn Carter, Evelyn Carter, Evelyn Carter. Each signature a nail, each one sealed and dated and set to fire on her word. When it was done, Henry gathered the pages with the care of a priest handling relics. "It's ready," he said. "It waits only for you." "Not until Saturday night." Evelyn said. "Not until she's wearing my grandmother's necklace in front of 600 people, and he's smiling beside her, certain he's won. Not 1 second before that." Henry paused at the door. "May I ask why you wait? You could end him this afternoon in silence. No spectacle. No risk." Evelyn turned to the tall windows and the glittering, indifferent city beyond them. "Because for 11 years he made me small and private, Henry, in kitchens and hallways and quiet rooms where no one could see. He took my family's name and wore it like his own. He took my grandmother's necklace and gave it to a girl who wanted to watch me break. Her reflection in the glass was very calm and very cold and very beautiful. So I'm going to give him one last public evening. I'm going to let him walk in believing the whole world is about to admire him. And then I'm going to let the whole world watch it fall. Not because I need them to see, because he does. Because a man like Daniel Whitmore has never once been afraid of losing money. He's only ever been afraid of losing the room." Henry looked at her a long moment. "Then Saturday," he said. "Saturday." Evelyn agreed. The door closed, and Evelyn Carter stood alone in the study of a Central Park penthouse one day from the Crescent Moon Charity Ball with a signed portfolio in a locked drawer, a photographed confession in her phone, a Parisian master stitching armor across an ocean, a strategist waiting in the wings, and 14 million reasons to be merciless. Somewhere down in the glittering maze of the city, her husband was rehearsing the night he believed would be his triumph, buttoning his cuffs, choosing his words, imagining the cameras turning toward him and the young woman on his arm, imagining his wife small and pale and finished at the edge of the room. He had slid an empty box across the counter and thought he'd already won. He had no idea the game had not yet begun. He had no idea that the quiet woman he'd spent 11 years overlooking had just become the last thing his empire would ever see. And in 24 hours, in a room full of the most powerful people in New York, Evelyn Carter was going to descend a staircase and teach every single one of them the difference between the loudest person in the room and the one who owns the ground the room is standing on. The morning after she signed the portfolio, Evelyn Carter woke before dawn and did the one thing Daniel would never have expected. She made him breakfast. She stood in the kitchen where he'd slid the empty velvet box across the marble 2 days earlier, and she scrambled his eggs exactly the way he liked them, and when he wandered out at 7, bleary and suspicious, he stopped dead in the doorway. "What is this?" he said. Not a question, an accusation. "Breakfast," Evelyn said, sliding the plate toward him. "You have a big weekend. I thought you should eat." He didn't sit. He stood there in his robe staring at the eggs like they might be poisoned, and Evelyn watched the calculation move behind his eyes, the small, greedy machinery of a man trying to figure out the angle. "You're up to something," he said. "I'm making eggs, Daniel." "You don't make eggs. You have people who make eggs." "Maybe I'm turning over a new leaf." She poured his coffee. "Isn't that what you wanted, a wife who tries?" That landed somewhere he didn't like because his jaw tightened, and he finally sat down and picked up the fork, and for a moment there was only the sound of him eating, and her standing very still across the island, watching a man consume a meal made by the woman he was about to try to destroy in public. "Madison thinks I should skip the ball," he said, mouthful, testing her. "She thinks it sends the wrong message, showing up to your family thing." Evelyn's heart did not move. Not one beat out of rhythm. "And what do you think?" "I think," Daniel said, setting the fork down, leaning back, that old arrogance sliding back into place like a coat he'd worn too long, "that I built something in this city, and I'm done pretending I didn't. I think 600 of the most important people in New York are going to be in that room, and every one of them still thinks of me as your husband, the man who married up." His lip curled. "Saturday they find out who actually holds the power. Saturday, they see me arrive with a woman who makes them forget you ever existed." There it was. He'd said it out loud. The whole plan laid on the marble between the coffee and the eggs. And Evelyn, God the strength it took, smiled and said, "Then you should look your best. Wear the navy brioni. It always photographs well." He blinked. He'd been braced for a fight. He'd wanted one, she realized. He'd wanted her to scream so he could tell himself he was right to leave, and instead, she was recommending his suit. "You really don't care," he said slowly, and there was something almost hurt underneath it, some last wounded scrap of the boy who'd once needed her. "I care very much, Daniel," Evelyn said. "Just not about what you think I do." He left 20 minutes later, unsettled and unable to say why, and the moment the door closed, Evelyn set down the dish towel, and her hands were perfectly steady, and she said quietly to the empty kitchen, "Wear the navy. It'll look so good in the arrest photos." 12 hours until the ball and the war room was Margaret Sinclair's suite at the Carlisle. Margaret had transformed it. Corkboards, timelines, photographs. She stood in the center of it like a general the morning of a battle she had personally chosen the ground for, and when Evelyn walked in, Margaret didn't say hello. She said, "Sit down. We have a problem and I need you calm." Evelyn sat. "What problem?" "Madison Cole." Margaret tapped a photograph pinned to the board, a young woman undeniably beautiful, undeniably hungry. "She's not just some girl Daniel picked up. I had my people look into her. And Evelyn, she's smarter than he is. Considerably. She's been positioning herself for months. She has a publicist on retainer. She's been feeding photos to the society blogs, cropped careful, never showing his face, building anticipation. She wants Saturday to be her debut, her coming out. She intends to walk into that room and become somebody. Then she picked the right room, Evelyn said. That's not the problem. Margaret's voice dropped. The problem is this. 2 days ago, Madison Cole met privately with a reporter from the Manhattan Ledger. Alone, no Daniel. I don't know what she said, but I know that girl and I know that look, and Evelyn, she may be planning to burn him too. That stopped Evelyn cold. What do you mean? I mean, a girl that ambitious doesn't tie herself to a married billionaire unless she's certain he'll leave his wife. And if she's sniffing around reporters behind his back, it means she's hedging. It means she's not sure Daniel's going to follow through. It means she has her own plan, and her own plan might not include being quietly humiliated by us on Saturday night. Margaret folded her arms. We plan to expose the necklace as stolen, to make her the girl caught wearing another woman's legacy. But if she's already talking to the press, if she's already building her own version of events, then she could spin it. She could turn victim. I didn't know it was stolen. He lied to me. I'm a victim too. And suddenly she walks away clean, and we look like two rich women who ganged up on a poor girl from nowhere. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. This was the thing about a plan. It was beautiful until it met another person's plan. And she'd been so focused on Daniel that she'd made the oldest mistake in the book. She'd underestimated the other woman. Then we find out what she told the reporter, Evelyn said, how we have 12 hours. Evelyn stood and crossed to the window and thought. And then slowly she smiled, not the cold smile she gave Daniel, but something sharper, something almost admiring. We don't fight her plan, Margaret, she said. We use it. If Madison Cole wants to be somebody Saturday night, if she's been building anticipation, feeding the blogs, meeting reporters, then she's given us the one thing we could never have manufactured on our own. Evelyn turned. An audience that's already watching. She spent months making sure every eye in that room turns to her the second she walks in. Her smile widened. So let them. Let every eye turn to Madison Cole and the ocean's tear. And then let me give those eyes something they'll never forget. Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled too. You're going to let her have her debut. I'm going to let her walk out onto the stage she built for herself, Evelyn said. And then I'm going to pull it out from under her feet in front of the entire audience she invited. And the reporter what she told the Ledger. Evelyn picked up her phone. Then let's find out. What's the reporter's name? Diane Okafor. Evelyn was already dialing a number she knew by heart, because a Carter always knew the names of the people who wrote the city's stories. Diane, it's Evelyn Carter. A pause. Yes, that Evelyn Carter. I understand you spoke with a young woman named Madison Cole 2 days ago. Another pause longer, and Evelyn's face gave away nothing. I see. I understand completely. Diane, before you print a single word of whatever she told you, I want you to be at the Crescent Moon Ball tonight as my personal guest front of the room, and I promise you that what you'll witness will be a far better story than whatever that girl sold you. The real story, with documents, on the record. Pause. Yes, wear something you can move quickly in. You'll want to. Aw, Kami. She hung up. Margaret was staring at her. What did Madison tell her? Evelyn set down the phone slowly. That Daniel Whitmore embezzled from his own family trust. That Madison has proof, and that she's willing to trade it for the right price and the right protection. Evelyn's eyes were very cold now. The girl isn't hedging Margaret. She's already betraying him. She was never planning to be his mistress. She was planning to be his ruin and collect the wreckage. Margaret went pale. Then she knows everything we know. No, Evelyn said. She knows what she overheard and what she stole from his phone. She has fragments. She has enough to blackmail him or to sell him. Evelyn began gathering her coat. What she does not have is the trust itself. She doesn't have Henry. She doesn't have the signatures. She doesn't have the legal machinery already loaded and cocked and waiting for my word. She has a knife. I have the whole army. Evelyn paused at the door. And more than that, she has no idea that I know she exists as anything other than a girl in a loft. She thinks she's the only clever person in this story. She's dangerous, Evelyn. She's ambitious, Evelyn corrected. There's a difference, and by midnight she's going to learn it the hard way, just like Daniel. 10 hours until the ball, and across the ocean the armor had arrived. Lucien Moreau flew in personally. The old master had not left Paris for a client in 6 years, and he arrived at the penthouse with 2 assistants and a garment bag, carried the way pallbearers carry a casket. He unzipped it in Evelyn's dressing room and said nothing. He simply stepped back and let her look. It was not a dress. Evelyn had asked for armor, and Lucien Moreau had given her armor. Black, but not simply black. Black that seemed to drink the light out of the air around it. Obsidian silk, cut so severely it looked less sewn than forged. And when she lifted the hem, a flash of blood-red lining hidden, until you moved so that with every step there would be a whisper of scarlet, like a blade half drawn from a sheath. When you walk, Lucien murmured, they will see the red only for an instant, and they will not know why their hearts begin to pound. He handed her a second box, and this. Inside was a choker. Not diamonds, or not only diamonds. Platinum so dark it was nearly black, set with stones that did not sparkle so much as worn. Your husband gave a girl a necklace that says, "Look how beautiful she is," Lucien said quietly. This says something else. This says, "Look who holds the power." There is a difference, chérie, and tonight the entire room will feel it before they understand it. Evelyn looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. "Lucien," she said, "when I married him, you made me a gown that made him fall to his knees." "I remember." "Do you think," she said softly, "that if I'd worn something like this back then, something that said power instead of beauty, do you think he'd have dared to do what he did? Lucien Moreau, who had dressed queens and buried the reputations of men who wronged them, came to stand beside her in the mirror. "No, chérie," he said. "But then you were not this woman yet. He did not marry the woman in this mirror. He married the girl in the wedding gown, and he spent 11 years mistaking one for the other." He met her eyes in the glass. That was his fatal error, not the affair, not the necklace. The error was believing the girl he married and the woman she would become were the same person. Tonight he learns they were never the same at all. 6 hours until the ball, and Daniel Whitmore made his second mistake of the day. He called her. "Change of plans," he said, and she could hear traffic behind him, hear the particular brightness in his voice that meant he was pleased with himself. "Madison and I are arriving separately. She'll come at 9, make an entrance. I'll already be inside. It'll look natural, organic." "How thoughtful," Evelyn said. "I need you to do something for me." And here it came, the thing that would have broken a lesser woman, the sheer breathtaking arrogance of it. "When she arrives, when Madison walks in, I need you to be gracious. Cameras will be on her. If you make a scene, if you look bitter, it makes me look bad, and I've worked too hard for this. So smile, welcome her. Be the bigger person." A pause. "Do this for me, Evelyn. For everything we had." Evelyn closed her eyes. For everything we had. He was asking her to personally welcome his mistress wearing her grandmother's stolen necklace into her own family's ball with a smile for the cameras so that he would look good. And the terrible, wonderful thing was that it fit her plan perfectly. "Of course, Daniel," she said, and let a small tremor into her voice, just enough. Just a taste of the broken woman he needed her to be. "I'll be gracious. I'll welcome her properly. I promise you no one will ever forget how I greet Madison Cole tonight." "Thank you," he said, and she could hear the relief, the triumph, the certainty that he'd won. "You're a good woman, Evelyn. I mean that. This is going to be a good night for everyone." "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "I believe it will be." She hung up, and she stood there holding the phone, and for one moment, just one, the enormity of it caught up with her. 11 years. She had given him 11 years. She had believed once, standing in a wedding gown that made him fall to his knees, that they would grow old in that penthouse, that the empty rooms would fill with children, that the man across the marble island would be the last face she saw. She had believed all of it, and he had taken all of it and slid an empty velvet box across the counter and called it a Tuesday. And then the moment passed, the way a wave passes, and left behind only the cold, clean sand of resolve. She would not cry. She had promised. And more than that, grief was a door, and she had decided to keep it locked until Daniel Whitmore was behind bars, and Madison Cole was a footnote, and the ocean's tear was back in the vault where it belonged. There would be time for grief later. Tonight was for something else. 4 hours until the ball, and Henry Caldwell called with the last piece. "It's done," he said. Every document notarized, every signature witnessed. The clawback, the acceleration, the withdrawal of the trust's backing from his credit facilities, all of it sits in a sealed portfolio, and the instant you give the word, it executes automatically. His lines collapse. His covenants trigger in sequence. Within 90 minutes of your signal, his own bank will be legally obligated to notify his investors. A pause. "But Miss Carter, there's something you need to know. Something I found this afternoon." Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. "Tell me." "Daniel isn't just insolvent in waiting. He's leveraged everything. Every share he owns, every asset he's borrowed against. And do you know what he pledged as collateral on his largest personal loan?" Henry's voice was very quiet. "The trust bridge, the $14 million he stole. He listed it on the loan documents as a legitimate asset of the company, which means the moment the trust claws it back, the moment those $14 million evaporate, he will have committed loan fraud against his lender as well. 2 frauds, federal on both counts." Henry paused. "Evelyn, when this executes, he does not merely lose his company. He goes to prison. There is no version of tonight where he walks away free. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I need you to be certain, truly certain, because after tonight, there is no forgiveness available, even if you should want it." Yacht. Evelyn looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman in the obsidian gown with the choker that said power, and she thought about the empty velvet box. And that's the best part. And a girl who wanted to watch the Ice Queen break. "Henry," she said, "do you remember what my grandmother told me the last time I saw her before she died? I remember she loved you very much. She held my hand and she said, 'Evelyn, you have a soft heart, and softness is a beautiful thing. But one day a wolf will come for everything I built, and on that day you will have to decide whether you are a soft woman or a Carter. And I am sorry, my darling, but you cannot be both.'" Evelyn's voice did not waver. "I've spent 9 years hoping she was wrong. Tonight I finally understand she wasn't." She straightened. "Execute on my word, not 1 second before. And Henry, thank you. For everything. For being the one thing in this family that money couldn't buy." "It has been the honor of my life to serve you," Henry said, and his old voice cracked just slightly. "All 3 of you. Go end him, Miss Carter." 2 hours until the ball, and Madison Cole made her move. The text came to Daniel's phone, but Daniel had made his final fatal error weeks ago when he'd synced that phone to the tablet in his home office, the tablet Evelyn had never stopped watching. So the message that appeared on Daniel's screen appeared 30 seconds later on Evelyn's. "Change of plan, baby. I'm not coming at 9. I'm coming at 10 after the speeches when the room is full and the press is bored and hungry. I want maximum impact. And I have a surprise for you, a little announcement of my own. Trust me, by tomorrow, everyone in New York will know exactly who I am. You're going to be so proud." Evelyn read it twice. Then she called Margaret. "She moved to 10, Evelyn said, and she's planning an announcement, her own." "An announcement," Margaret's voice sharpened. "The reporter, the ledger. She's going to do it live in the room in front of the press. She's going to announce the affair or the embezzlement or both. She's going to detonate her own bomb and cast herself as the whistleblower, the brave young woman exposing the corrupt billionaire." A beat. "My God, Evelyn, she's going to try to steal your entire night." "No," Evelyn said, and her voice was ice. "She's going to walk into the middle of a room I control at the exact moment I choose wearing my grandmother's stolen necklace and try to light a match. And she has no idea that I've already flooded the entire building with gasoline." She was already moving, already reaching for the gown. "She wants to arrive at 10 for maximum impact. Then I'll descend at 10:02. Let her have her 30 seconds. And then let the whole city watch what a real reckoning looks like. Evelyn, get Diane Okafor to the front. Get Henry to his position by the coat check with the portfolio. And Margaret—" Evelyn paused, and for a moment the mask slipped just enough for her oldest friend to hear the woman underneath. "Thank you for not letting me do this alone. For every whisper you followed. I don't say it enough, but you've been the only person in this city who never once wanted anything from me except to see me survive." There was a silence on the line, and then Margaret Sinclair, who had buried the reputations of a dozen men and never once shed a tear, said thickly, "Go put on your armor, darling. And when you come down those stairs tonight, you come down for every woman who has ever slid an empty box across a counter and told to smile. You come down for all of us." 1 hour until the ball, and Daniel Whitmore stood in the penthouse tying his tie, the navy brioni exactly as she'd suggested, and Evelyn watched him from the doorway of the bedroom, and something in her went very still and very sad and very final. "You look nice," she said. He glanced at her in the mirror and did a double take because she wasn't dressed yet. She was still in her robe, hair down, and he'd half expected to find her already armored for the evening. "You're not ready," he said. "It's in an hour." "I'll be ready when I need to be," Evelyn said. "I move quickly when it matters." Something in her tone made him turn around. He looked at her, really looked for what she realized was the first time in years, and a flicker of something crossed his face. Uncertainty. That same animal warning he'd shaken off on Thursday, crawling back up his spine. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "what are you planning tonight?" And she could have lied. She had lied all week, but standing there 1 hour from the end of everything she found, she didn't want to. Not entirely. She wanted him to carry one true thing into that room, one small seed of dread that would bloom into full horror at exactly the right moment. "Daniel," she said gently, "do you remember what you said to me the morning you gave her the necklace? You said the living need the pretty things more than the dead. You said my grandmother was gone, so her legacy should belong to whoever appreciated it." She stepped into the room. "I've thought about that all week, and I've decided you were right. Legacy shouldn't sit in a vault. It should be used. It should be wielded." She stopped a foot from him, and she looked up into the face of the man she'd loved and the man who'd betrayed her, and they were, she understood now, the same face and always had been. "So tonight, I'm going to wield mine, all of it, every last thing my grandmother built, and you're going to watch." His face changed. The color went out of it. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I made you breakfast this morning," Evelyn said. "Scrambled your eggs the way you like, poured your coffee. Do you know why?" "Evelyn." "Because I wanted to remember it," she said. "The last morning. I wanted one last ordinary moment before I became the woman my grandmother told me I'd have to be." She stepped back. "Wear the navy. Bring your girl. Arrive early like you planned. And when the room goes quiet tonight, and it will go very, very quiet, I want you to remember that I gave you a chance once standing in our kitchen to simply be a decent man, and you slid an empty box across the counter instead." Daniel Whitmore stood frozen in his navy suit, and for the first time in the entire arc of his charmed and arrogant life, Daniel Whitmore was afraid. "You can't touch me," he said, but his voice shook. "Whatever you think you have the company, the money, it's mine. I built it. You can't—" "I don't want your company, Daniel." Evelyn was already turning toward her dressing room, toward the obsidian armor waiting on its stand. "I never did. I only want back what was always mine, and I'm going to take it in front of 600 people because you were going to take it from me the same way." She paused at the door without turning around. "Madison's arriving at 10, by the way, not 9. She's planning a surprise announcement. Did you know that? Your clever girl has been meeting with reporters behind your back. She was never going to be your mistress, Daniel. She was going to be your executioner. The only thing you two ever had in common was that you both thought I was too soft to matter." And she walked into the dressing room and closed the door, leaving Daniel Whitmore alone in the bedroom, ashen, unraveling, hearing for the first time the sound of the trap he'd walked into 60 years in the making, a trap set by a dead woman's hand and sprung by a granddaughter he'd spent 11 years mistaking for someone weak. 90 minutes later, the Metropolitan Museum of Art blazed with the wealth of New York, and Daniel Whitmore stood near the center of the grand hall with a glass of champagne. He wasn't drinking, sweating through his navy suit, checking his phone every 90 seconds, unable to reach his wife, unable to reach Madison, unable to shake the cold that had settled into his bones an hour ago, in a bedroom that no longer felt like his. 9 o'clock came. Evelyn did not appear. 9:30. The speeches began. The mayor spoke. A children's hospital director wept at the podium. And still no Evelyn, and Daniel's smile grew more brittle by the minute, and the people who'd come expecting to see the great Carter hostess began quietly to ask each other where she was. 10 o'clock struck, and the doors at the top of the west staircase opened, and Madison Cole appeared. Young, radiant, deliberate, and around her throat, catching every light in the room, blazed the ocean's tear. She paused at the top of the stairs, exactly as she'd rehearsed, waiting for the room to turn, waiting for the cameras, waiting to become somebody. And the room did turn. The cameras did rise. Madison Cole lifted her chin and began her descent, and Daniel watched her come, and for one horrible second he let himself believe that maybe Evelyn had bluffed, that maybe there was no trap, that maybe he would survive this night after all. And then, at 10:02, on the opposite staircase, a second door opened. The music didn't stop on its own. Somewhere on a signal from a woman named Margaret Sinclair, the orchestra simply lifted their bows and went silent, and the silence spread across the grand hall like a held breath, and 600 of the most powerful people in New York turned as one toward the east staircase, where a woman in obsidian silk had appeared at the top of the stairs, black diamonds at her throat that did not sparkle so much as warn a whisper of blood red flashing at her hem with every unhurried step, and an expression on her face that was not grief, was not fury, was not the broken thing her husband had spent all week praying to see. It was ownership. Evelyn Carter had arrived, and she was not looking at the cameras. She was looking directly at her husband, and she began slowly to descend. She descended one step at a time, and with each step, the silence in the hall deepened because a room full of powerful people knows instinctively when it is watching a transfer of power, and this room knew. Madison Cole, halfway down the opposite staircase, faltered. It was a small thing, a hitch in her practiced glide, a flicker of her eyes from the cameras which had begun one by one to swing away from her and toward the woman in obsidian and Madison Cole, understood in the space of a single heartbeat that the room she had spent months preparing to conquer had just been taken from her by someone she'd never planned for. She kept descending. She had no choice. But the radiance had gone brittle on her face, and the ocean's tear at her throat, which had blazed like triumph 30 seconds ago, now sat there like evidence. Daniel Whitmore did not move at all. He stood rooted at the center of the hall, champagne forgotten in his hand, and he watched his wife come down the stairs, and every certainty he had carried into that room drained out of him like water from a cracked glass. This was not the woman he'd left in a robe an hour ago. This was not the woman he'd married. This was not, he realized with a slow rising horror, a woman he had ever actually met. Evelyn reached the bottom of the staircase, and she did not go to him. She turned instead toward the nearest cluster of the city's most powerful people, a former Treasury Secretary, the chairman of the largest private bank in New York, a woman who owned half the real estate south of 59th Street, and she greeted them by name warmly with the easy grace of a woman entirely at home in her own kingdom. "Robert, Eleanor, James, I'm so glad you came." She took the older woman's hands. "The children's wing wouldn't exist without you. My grandmother would have adored you for it." And the powerful people lit up, because Evelyn Carter had that gift. Her grandmother had the gift of making the most important person in any room feel like the only person in it. And within 30 seconds, she had a circle of the city's titans around her, laughing softly, leaning in, and the cameras had followed, and Madison Cole was left standing at the foot of the opposite staircase in a stolen necklace with no one looking at her at all. That was the first blow. And it was the cruelest one Evelyn could have chosen, because it was not an attack. It was erasure. Madison had come to be seen, and Evelyn had simply made her invisible. Daniel broke first. He always would. He crossed the hall too fast, his composure cracking with every step, and he reached the edge of Evelyn's circle and said in a voice pitched low, but not low enough, "Evelyn, a word, now." She turned to him with the mild, pleasant surprise of a hostess greeting an acquaintance she hadn't expected. "Daniel, there you are. I thought you were in San Francisco." The people around her went very still, because they had all been told over the past weeks in one polite fiction or another that Daniel Whitmore was traveling. And here he was. And here was his wife expressing gentle surprise at his presence in a tone that made it perfectly clear she was doing no such thing. "Don't," Daniel said, and there was sweat at his hairline now. "Whatever this is, whatever you're doing, stop it. People are watching." "Yes," Evelyn agreed pleasantly. "They are. Isn't it a wonderful turnout?" "Evelyn, you told me you were in San Francisco, Daniel." She said it lightly, almost fondly, but the words carried because she had timed them for a lull, and a woman who has hosted this ball for 11 years knows exactly how sound travels in that hall. "You told me you'd missed the ball entirely, that I should handle it alone." She tilted her head. "I suppose the truth had other plans." A ripple moved through the nearest guests. The Treasury Secretary's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. Eleanor, who owned half of downtown, took a slow and interested sip of her champagne. "That's not," Daniel started. "But I'm so glad you came after all," Evelyn continued over him smooth as silk. "And I see you brought a guest." And here at last, she let her eyes travel across the room unhurried until they landed on Madison Cole, who stood alone, abandoned the ocean's tear, burning at her throat. How lovely. Every head in the vicinity turned to follow Evelyn's gaze, and for the first time all night, the full attention of the room's most powerful people landed on the young woman in the borrowed radiance and the impossible necklace, and Madison Cole, who had wanted so badly to be seen, discovered that being seen was not at all the same as being welcomed. "Bring her over, Daniel," Evelyn said. "I'd love to meet her properly. It would be rude not to." Daniel's face was gray. "Evelyn, please. I insist." There is a particular kind of horror in being unable to refuse a gracious host, and Daniel Whitmore felt every ounce of it as he crossed the hall, took Madison Cole by the elbow, and brought her before his wife like a man leading a lamb he had only just realized was walking to slaughter. Madison recovered fast. Evelyn had to give her that. The girl was quick. By the time she stood before Evelyn, she had rebuilt her smile, lifted her chin, and armored herself in the particular confidence of the young and beautiful who have never yet lost anything. "Mrs. Whitmore," Madison said, and there was a glint of challenge in it, a small cruelty, the emphasis on the married name, a deliberate little blade. "I've heard so much about you." "Carter," Evelyn corrected gently, "but I'm sure you'll get there. You seem like a girl who learns quickly what things are worth." She smiled. "And I've heard a great deal about you as well, Madison. May I call you Madison? I feel as though I already know you." She let that sit for exactly one beat. "You're wearing something extraordinary." Madison's hand rose almost involuntarily to the necklace. "It was a gift." "I can see that." Evelyn stepped closer, and her voice dropped warm and confidential, a voice for sharing secrets between women, except that she pitched it again to Carrie. Do you know its name? Its name. It has a name. It's called the Ocean's Tear. Evelyn reached out, unhurried, and let her fingertips hover just above the largest stone without quite touching it. My grandmother wore it the night she opened the first children's hospital this foundation ever built. She wore it when she buried my grandfather. She wore it the day I was born. She told me she put it on because she wanted the first beautiful thing I ever saw to be something that would outlast her. Her eyes lifted to Madison's. She left it to me, in her will, in her own handwriting. It has never once in 60 years belonged to anyone whose name was not Carter. A pause. Until tonight. Madison's smile flickered. She glanced at Daniel, a fast, involuntary flicker, the look of a person checking whether the ground beneath them is as solid as they'd been promised. Daniel could not meet her eyes. "You're wearing my family's legacy, Madison," Evelyn said softly. "Enjoy it, truly. Wear it well tonight." And then so gently it was almost kind, "It was never going to be yours to keep." It was 10:19 when Margaret Sinclair took the podium. She had been introduced minutes earlier as a longtime friend of the foundation there, to say a few words before the evening's final toast, and no one thought anything of it because Margaret Sinclair had been saying a few words at events like this for 30 years. She adjusted the microphone. She smiled at the room, and then she said the thing that turned a social evening into a catastrophe. Before we raise our glasses tonight, I want to take a moment to speak about legacy, about the things families build and the things families protect. Her voice was warm, unhurried, and utterly in command. Many of you knew Cornelia Carter. Many of you were in the room the night she wore a certain necklace to open the very first hospital this foundation ever funded, a necklace called the Ocean's Tear. A soft murmur moved through the room. Older heads nodded. Someone near the front sighed at the memory. It's a magnificent piece, insured, cataloged, and legally held in the Carter Family Trust, from which, by the plain and unbreakable terms of Cornelia's will, it may never be removed, sold, gifted, or transferred to any person outside the family, not for any reason, not by anyone. The room had gone very quiet now, because the powerful people in it were beginning to do the arithmetic, and their eyes were beginning to move slowly, inexorably toward the young woman standing beside Daniel Whitmore, with a very famous necklace at her throat. "I mention this," Margaret went on, and now every trace of warmth had drained from her voice, leaving something clean and cold and final. "Because it has come to the Foundation's attention that this irreplaceable heirloom, this legally protected trust asset, has been removed from the Carter Vault without authorization and is being worn tonight in this room by an individual with no legal right to possess it." She let that land. She let it detonate. I'm told the proper term for that is theft. The room erupted. Not in noise. This was not a room that erupted in noise, but in something worse, a low electric hiss of 600 people all turning to whisper to the person beside them at once, and every phone in the hall came up, and every camera swung, and Madison Cole stood frozen in the center of it all, with the Ocean's Tear blazing at her throat like a brand. "That's a lie," Madison said, but her voice cracked, and it did not carry the way Margaret's had, and it was swallowed by the hiss. She turned to Daniel. "Tell them, Daniel, tell them you gave it to me. Tell them it's legal." And Daniel Whitmore, ashen, sweating, ruined, said nothing at all, because he could not tell them it was legal, because it was not. That was the moment Madison Cole understood she'd been left holding the knife. Evelyn watched it happen in real time, watched the calculation flicker back into the girl's eyes, watched her recover with an agility that Evelyn, despite everything, could not help but admire. Because Madison Cole did not crumble. Madison Cole pivoted. She reached up, unclasped the necklace with trembling fingers, and held it out at arm's length as though it had burned her. "I didn't know," she said, and now her voice found its strength now it carried, because she had found her role at last. "I didn't know it was stolen. He told me it was his. He told me it was a gift that it was his to give." She turned to face the room, and tears, real or summoned, it didn't matter, brightened her eyes. "I'm a victim here. He lied to me. He lied to all of us. And it's not just the necklace. Her chin came up. Daniel Whitmore has been stealing far more than jewelry. He's been stealing from his own family's trust. Millions. I have proof. I came here tonight to expose him, and Madison. Evelyn's voice cut through the hall, quiet but absolute, and it stopped the girl cold. Stop talking now, while you still can. You can't silence me. I'm not silencing you, Evelyn said. I'm saving you. There's a difference, and you have about 4 seconds to learn it. She stepped forward. You want to stand up in front of the most powerful people in New York and announce that you have proof of Daniel Whitmore's embezzlement, by all means. But understand what you're actually confessing to. You've just told 600 witnesses that you knew, for months, that you knew he was stealing from a family trust, that you had proof, and that instead of reporting it, you accepted a stolen heirloom, a Soho loft, a private jet, and $14 million worth of a lifestyle funded by that theft. Evelyn's voice was terribly gentle. That doesn't make you a whistleblower, Madison. That makes you an accessory. And now you've confessed to it on the record in front of the press, in front of a former Treasury Secretary, and in front of the 2 federal agents who walked in the door 90 seconds ago. Madison's head snapped toward the entrance. They were there. Of course they were there. 2 of them unremarkable in dark suits, standing quietly by the coat check beside a silver-haired man holding a leather portfolio, and they had been there since 10:15, and they had heard every word. The necklace slipped from Madison Cole's fingers. It struck the marble floor with a sound like a small bell tolling, and the Ocean's Tear 60 years of Carter legacy skittered across the stone and came to rest at Evelyn's feet. Evelyn looked down at it for a long moment. Then she bent, unhurried, and picked it up and held it in her palm, and something crossed her face that she had not allowed herself to feel all week. A flicker of grief quickly mastered the private ache of a granddaughter holding the last warm thing her grandmother had ever touched. "Hello again," she murmured to it, too soft for anyone to hear. Then she straightened, and her face was armor once more. It was 10:31 when Daniel finally broke and lunged. Not at Evelyn, even ruined some animal instinct told him not to touch her, but at the reporter. At Diane Okafor, who stood near the front with her phone raised, recording every second of it, and Daniel Whitmore crossed the space between them in 3 furious strides, reaching for the phone, snarling, "Give me that you're not putting this anywhere." He never reached it, because Henry Caldwell stepped smoothly into his path. Henry's 71 years old, calm as a glacier, and Daniel collided with him and rebounded, and Henry did not so much as sway, and he looked at the man his employer's family had made rich, and he said in a voice like a closing vault door, "That's quite enough, Mr. Whitmore. You've done enough reaching for things that were never yours. Get out of my way, old man." "No," Henry said simply, and Daniel drew back his fist. The room gasped. Cameras flashed, and Daniel Whitmore, in front of 600 of the most powerful people in New York, in front of the press, in front of federal agents, cocked his arm to strike a 71-year-old man. "Daniel!" Evelyn's voice, quiet, and it stopped him with his fist still raised. "Look at what you've become. Look at where your hand is." She was not afraid. She had never, he realized, been afraid of him, not once, not in 11 years, and the realization was somehow the worst thing of all. "You walked in here tonight to humiliate me, to replace me, to show this whole city that the great Daniel Whitmore had traded up." Her voice dropped. "Put your hand down. You've already lost. The only question left is how much dignity you leave with. And every second you stand there with your fist in the air, the answer gets smaller." Slowly trembling, Daniel lowered his arm. He turned to face his wife, and the mask was gone now, entirely gone, and what was left underneath was just a frightened man in a navy suit who had gambled everything on the belief that the woman across from him was weak. "What do you want?" he whispered. "Money. Take it. Take the penthouse. Take whatever you want. Just stop this, please. There are people here. There are cameras. My investors are here. Evelyn, my whole company is watching, please, just—" "I don't want your money, Daniel." Evelyn closed the necklace in her palm. "I told you that an hour ago in our bedroom. I don't want anything you built. I only want back what was always mine." She stepped past him toward the podium, toward the room, toward the waiting hush. "And I'm afraid you're about to learn that I've already taken it." It was 10:40 when Evelyn Carter took the microphone. She did not need to quiet the room. The room quieted itself the moment she touched the podium. 600 faces turned toward her, and she stood there for a moment in her obsidian armor with the recovered necklace warm in her hand, and she looked out at the wealth and power of New York, and she began to speak. "Thank you all for coming tonight." Her voice was steady, warm, gracious, the voice of a hostess, except that everyone in the room now knew it for what it truly was. "For 60 years, my family has gathered this city on this night to do a single thing to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Children, the sick, the forgotten. My grandmother built this foundation on a simple belief that power exists to be used in service of the powerless, that anything else is not power at all, only theft wearing a nicer suit." A murmur of soft approving sound. She let it settle. "Tonight, I owe you the truth because you are my family's friends and you deserve it before you read it elsewhere." She drew a breath. "My husband, Daniel Whitmore, has for the past 3 months been diverting funds from the Carter Family Trust. Not thousands, millions. $14 million to be precise, misappropriated from money intended for the hospitals and scholarships. This foundation exists to fund and used instead to finance a private life he believed no one would ever uncover." The room did not gasp this time. It had moved past gasping into something graver, a collective stillness, the silence of powerful people recognizing that they were watching history bend. He misrepresented that theft to his own investors as a legitimate company asset. He pledged it as collateral against personal loans. Many of those investors are in this room tonight. She let her eyes move across the crowd, and here and there a face went pale. Men and women who had put their fortunes into Whitmore's empire, doing the sudden math of what they had just learned. "I did not learn this as a betrayed wife," Evelyn continued. "I learned it as the head of the Carter family and the sole living trustee of everything my grandmother built. And so I did not respond as a wife. I responded as a Carter." She looked at last directly at Daniel. 3 days ago, I signed a series of legal instruments prepared by our family's executor. Clawback authorizations, loan acceleration notices, a full withdrawal of the Carter Trust's financial backing from every credit facility supporting Whitmore Technologies. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Those instruments executed automatically at 10 o'clock this evening, the moment my guest of honor arrived. The room went absolutely silent, and somewhere in the crowd a phone buzzed, then another, then a dozen, then 100 investors, board members, bankers, all of them receiving in real time the automated legal notifications that Henry Caldwell had promised would arrive within 90 minutes of the signal, and the signal had been given at 10 o'clock, and it was now 10:41, and the notifications had come. Daniel Whitmore watched the faces of his investors change one by one all around the room, and he watched them reach for their phones, and he watched them read, and he watched the last of his empire die in the reflected light of 100 screens. "By midnight," Evelyn said quietly into the microphone, "Whitmore Technologies will be insolvent. Its credit lines have collapsed, its covenants have triggered, and its founder—" She looked at him, and for one moment, one single moment, there was something almost like sorrow in it. Its founder will answer for what he did with money that was never his. She set the microphone down. The 2 federal agents were already moving. But the agents did not reach Daniel first. Margaret Sinclair did. She stepped down from the podium area and crossed to him, and she did not gloat because Margaret Sinclair had learned long ago that gloating was the pastime of small people, and she was not small. She simply stopped in front of the man who had spent 11 years treating her best friend as furniture, and she said quietly enough that only he could hear, "I want you to know something before they take you, Daniel. I've watched you for a decade. I watched you walk into rooms you didn't build and take credit for work you didn't do. I watched you shrink her a little more every year in ways so small no one else could see them. And I said nothing because it wasn't my place." Her eyes were flint, But I remembered. I remembered every single one, and tonight I got to help her collect on all of it at once. Daniel stared at her, uncomprehending, a drowning man watching the shore recede. You planned this. You and her. You planned all of it. We didn't plan a thing, Margaret said. You did. You built this trap yourself, board by board, over 3 months, and all we did was open the door and wait for you to walk through it. You gave her the necklace, Daniel. You told her to handle the ball alone. You told her you were in San Francisco. Every wall of this cage, you nailed it up with your own hands. She stepped back. She'd have forgiven the affair, you know. I think she actually would have. Women forgive affairs every day. They survive them. But you didn't just betray her. You stole her grandmother's name and gave it to a stranger to wear like a costume. And there is no forgiving that. Not in this family. Not ever. Cha. It was 10:44 when the first investor confronted him. His name was Gerald Voss, and he had put $90 million into Whitmore Technologies over 4 years, and he pushed through the crowd with his phone still glowing in his hand and his face the color of a man having the worst night of his life. Daniel! His voice shook with fury. I just got a notice from the bank. The lines are frozen, all of them. Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me she's bluffing. Tell me my $90 million isn't Gerald. Is it true? Voss grabbed him by the lapels of the Navy suit, and 2 other men were already moving in behind him. Other investors, other ruined fortunes, and the federal agents quickened their pace. The $14 million. Did you pledge stolen trust money as collateral on the Series D? Did you list it as a company asset? Because if you did, Daniel, that's not just your company, that's gone. That's fraud. That's my exposure. That's every one of us in this room who backed you. Let go of me. Answer me! Voss roared, and the whole room heard it, and Daniel Whitmore looked around at the faces closing in on him, the people he had spent years cultivating, the people whose admiration he had craved more than money, more than sex, more than anything, and he saw in every one of them the same thing. Not anger, worse than anger, disgust. It was a bridge loan, Daniel said, and even now, even at the end, the lie came out of him automatically, reflexively, because lying was the only language he had ever truly been fluent in. It was temporary. I was going to pay it back before anyone found out, Evelyn said. She had come down from the podium, and she stood now at the edge of the gathering storm calm in her obsidian armor. That's the end of that sentence, Daniel. You were going to pay it back before anyone found out. That was always the plan. It's the same plan every man like you has ever had. Take what isn't yours and simply be clever enough that no one ever checks. She looked at the ring of ruined investors around him. The trouble is, gentlemen, that someone always checks eventually. He just never imagined it would be the wife he'd already thrown away. Madison Cole tried to run at 10:46. She had been edging toward the exit since the necklace hit the floor, sliding along the wall in the shadow of the confrontation. And for one moment it seemed she might make it, might slip out into the night and disappear back into whatever obscurity she'd crawled out of. But one of the 2 federal agents peeled away from Daniel's unraveling and intercepted her at the coat check with the unhurried certainty of a man who had done this many times before. Ms. Cole. He didn't raise his voice. We'd like a word. I'm a witness, Madison said quickly, spinning her story even now, even cornered. I'm cooperating. I came here to expose him. You heard me. I have information about the embezzlement I can testify. You said in front of 600 people that you'd had proof of the theft for months, the agent said mildly. You said you'd known and stayed. That's not the statement of a witness, ma'am. We're going to need to talk about what you knew and when you knew it, and about the necklace. He glanced down at the floor where the ocean's tear had fallen, now cradled in Evelyn's palm. Receiving stolen property valued in the millions is its own matter entirely. Madison Cole's beautiful calculating face finally fully cracked. He gave it to me, she whispered, and now the tears were unmistakably real, the tears of a young woman watching the future she'd schemed and clawed and betrayed for evaporate in a single hour. He told me it was his. He told me he was leaving her. He told me I was going to be... Her voice broke. He told me I was going to be somebody. You were going to be somebody, Evelyn said. She had come to stand a few feet away, and she looked at Madison Cole with something that was not quite pity and not quite contempt, but some cold cousin of both. You were going to be Mrs. Whitmore. You'd calculated the whole thing, the loft, the necklace, the debut, the announcement. You were going to expose him, divorce-proof yourself, walk away with the sympathy of the city, and half of whatever survived. She tilted her head. It wasn't a bad plan, Madison. It was a genuinely clever plan. You made only one mistake. Madison looked up at her, wet-eyed, hollowed out. What? You picked a man who had already stolen everything he had from a woman stronger than both of you, Evelyn said. You tied your future to a sinking ship and thought you were clever for boarding it early. But the ship was always going down, Madison. From the moment he pledged my grandmother's money as collateral, it was always going down. You just didn't realize you'd handcuffed yourself to the hull. She turned away. Cooperate with them. Tell them everything. It's the only card you have left, and if you play it well, you might see daylight again before you're 40. That's more mercy than you came here to show me. At 10:51, they read Daniel Whitmore his rights. They did it quietly, professionally, in the center of the Grand Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with the wealth of New York arranged in a wide, silent, staring circle around him, and the phrases fell into the hush, one by one, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, everything he said, able to be used against him. And Daniel Whitmore stood there in his Navy suit and listened to his life end in the flat, patient cadence of a federal agent who had said the same words 1,000 times and felt nothing saying them again. You can't do this, Daniel said, but the fight had gone out of it entirely. It was a reflex now, the last twitch of a dying thing. I'm Daniel Whitmore. I built a company worth billions. I employ 4,000 people. You can't just... You embezzled from a family trust and lied about it to your investors, sir, the agent said. The size of the company doesn't change the size of the crime. If anything, it makes it larger. He guided Daniel's hands behind his back. The cuffs closed with a soft final click that somehow in that enormous silent room everyone heard. And in the instant before they led him away, Daniel Whitmore looked across the hall and found his wife. She was standing near the foot of the east staircase, the recovered necklace closed in her hand, and she was not smiling in triumph, and she was not weeping, and she was not doing any of the things a lesser person might have done in the moment of complete victory over the one who had wronged them. She was simply watching him steady and calm and unreadable the way one watches weather move across a distant part of the sky. Evelyn, he said, and his voice broke on it. How long were you planning this? And she considered the question honestly, because she owed him one honest answer at the end. Since the moment you slid that empty box across the counter, she said, you looked at me and you decided I was already finished, that I was small enough to steal from, small enough to replace, small enough to humiliate at my own family's ball. And you were so certain of it, Daniel, that you never once looked closely enough to see that the woman standing in that kitchen wasn't the girl you married anymore. She stepped forward just once. You spent 11 years teaching me that softness gets you robbed. So I stopped being soft. You did that, not me. Every hard thing I became because you needed me to be soft. And I finally understood that I couldn't survive you and stay that way. Her voice dropped. You didn't destroy a wife tonight, Daniel. You finished building the woman who was always going to destroy you. Go. They're waiting. They led him out through the great doors of the museum, past the cameras, past the flashing phones, past the silent, judging faces of everyone whose good opinion he had spent his whole life chasing, and the doors closed behind him, and Daniel Whitmore was gone. For a long moment, the grand hall simply held its breath, and then slowly the room began to move again, the whispers rising, the phones lifting the machinery of the city's memory, beginning to record what it had just witnessed so that it could be retold in 1,000 quieter rooms for years to come. But it did not descend into chaos, because at the center of it all stood a woman in obsidian silk who had, without ever once raising her voice, demonstrated exactly who held the power in that room. And the room reorganized itself around her the way iron filings reorganize around a magnet. The former Treasury Secretary was the first to approach. Evelyn, Robert said quietly, and there was a new note in his voice, a note she recognized because she had heard men use it with her grandmother her whole childhood. Respect. The specific, careful respect that powerful people reserve for someone who has just proven they are more powerful still. That was the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen in this room, and I was here the night your grandmother faced down the Hutchins syndicate. My grandmother taught me everything I know, Robert, Evelyn said. I only wish she'd been here to see it. She was, said Eleanor, the woman who owned half of downtown, coming to stand beside them. Don't be foolish, girl. Of course she was. The old woman took Evelyn's free hand in both of hers and squeezed it hard, and her eyes were bright. Cornelia Carter spent the last year of her life terrified that the family would end with a granddaughter too gentle for the world she was inheriting. She told me so herself. She was so afraid you were too kind. Eleanor's mouth curved. I only wish I could see her face right now. She was wrong, and she'd have been so glad to be wrong. Something moved behind Evelyn's composure at that some crack, some warmth, some ache, long held in check, and for just a moment, her eyes shone. But she mastered it the way she had mastered everything all week, and she pressed the old woman's hands and said, Thank you, Eleanor. That means more than you know. It was 11:04 when Henry Caldwell finally allowed himself to smile. He came to her through the thinning crowd, the leather portfolio tucked once more beneath his arm, and he stopped before her, and for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other. The old executor who had served 3 generations, and the granddaughter who had finally fully become the 4th. It's done, he said, all of it. The clawback is complete. The trust is whole again, and by tomorrow morning, the $14 million he stole will be back where it belongs, funding the things your grandmother intended it to fund. He paused. There will be years of legal aftermath, Miss Carter. Depositions, testimony, the trial itself. It won't be over quickly, and it won't be painless. I won't pretend otherwise. I know, Henry. But the war, he said quietly, the war is won. You won it tonight. In one evening, cleanly enough that no lawyer on earth will ever unwind it. He looked at her with something close to wonder. I have served this family for 40 years. I served your grandmother, and I served your father, and I loved them both. But I have never, in all that time, seen anything like what you did in this room tonight. You didn't just defeat him, Miss Carter. You let him defeat himself, and then you simply stood in the doorway when the walls came down. He inclined his head, the deepest gesture of respect the old man had in him. Your grandmother would be proud, but more than that, I think she would be relieved. Evelyn looked down at the ocean's tear in her palm, at 60 years of Carter legacy caught and glittering in the light, and she thought about a dying woman gripping her hand and warning her that a wolf would come. She told me a wolf would come, Henry, Evelyn said softly. She told me I'd have to choose whether I was a soft woman or a Carter. She said I couldn't be both. She closed her fingers around the necklace. I spent 9 years praying she was wrong about that. Tonight I stopped praying. She looked up at him, and her eyes were dry and clear and steady. The wolf came, and I chose. Henry Caldwell nodded slowly. Yes, he said. You did. And across the emptying hall, past the last of the whispering guests, past the reporter Diane Okafor, already writing the story that would run on the front page of every paper in the city by morning, past the spot on the marble floor where a stolen necklace had fallen from a schemer's throat. Evelyn Carter stood alone in her obsidian armor with her grandmother's legacy safe in her hand. At last, no longer. The billionaire's wife, no longer the woman anyone would ever again mistake for weak. And she did not smile and she did not weep. She simply stood in the ruin of the life she'd been handed and the beginning of the one she'd built, and she breathed for the first time in 11 years like a woman who owned every inch of the ground beneath her feet. The story ran at 6 the next morning, and by 7, the whole city was awake and talking. Diane Okafor's piece hit the front page of the Manhattan Ledger with a headline that would be quoted for years, and it did not read like gossip. It read like an execution report. Cold, documented, devastating, because Evelyn had given her the documents, all of them, and a reporter with proof is a very different animal than a reporter with rumors. By 8:03, networks had picked it up. By 9, Daniel Whitmore's name was trending in a way no man ever wants his name to trend. And by 10 o'clock that morning, while Evelyn sat alone in the penthouse drinking coffee she'd made herself, her phone had rung 41 times. She answered none of them. She had earned, she felt, one quiet morning. But the quiet did not last, because at 10:15 there was a knock at the door. Not a call. A knock which meant someone had gotten past the lobby, which meant someone with real power had decided this conversation would happen in person. Evelyn set down her coffee and went to answer it, and standing in the hall was a woman she had not expected to see and would not soon forget. Her name was Catherine Whitmore, Daniel's mother. "May I come in?" Catherine said. It was not a request. Evelyn stepped aside. They sat across from each other in the living room, where 4 days earlier Evelyn had learned the truth of her marriage, and for a long moment neither woman spoke. Catherine Whitmore was 70 years old, iron-haired, sharp-eyed, and she had raised Daniel alone after his father drank himself into an early grave, and she had spent 40 years working herself raw to give her son the opportunities she'd never had. Evelyn had always been careful with her. There was a hardness in Catherine that she'd never fully understood until this morning. "You destroyed my son," Catherine said finally. "No, Catherine," Evelyn said quietly. "Your son destroyed himself. I only refused to be the wreckage he stood on. He's in a cell, right now. My boy is in a federal cell." Catherine's voice cracked, and Evelyn saw the effort it cost her not to break the same iron control she recognized because she had spent a week wielding it herself. 40 years I gave everything to that child, everything, so that he'd never know what it was to have nothing. And now, she stopped. She pressed her lips together. And now he has nothing, because of you. "Because of what he did," Evelyn corrected gently, but without an inch of retreat. "Catherine, I loved your son for 11 years. I want you to hear that from me. I loved him. I would have grown old with him. I would have forgiven a great deal more than I want to admit even now." She leaned forward. "But he didn't just betray me. He stole my grandmother's necklace and gave it to a stranger. He stole $14 million from a fund that builds hospitals for children. He lied to the people who trusted him with their fortunes. Every single thing that happened to him last night he chose, step by step. I gave him a dozen chances to be a decent man, and he refused every one because he was so certain, so absolutely certain, that I was too weak to make him pay." Catherine was silent for a long time. "He always did underestimate people," she said at last, and there was something terrible and tired in it, a mother's oldest grief. Even as a boy, he'd look at someone and decide in a second what they were worth, and once he'd decided nothing could change his mind. It made him ruthless. I used to think it was strength." Her eyes came up to Evelyn's. "I told myself it was strength for 40 years because admitting it was a flaw meant admitting I'd raised it into him." And then Catherine Whitmore did something that Evelyn had not expected at all. She reached into her handbag and she withdrew an envelope thick and creased, and she set it on the table between them. "I came here to scream at you," Catherine said. "I came here to call you a cold, calculating woman who ruined my son over an affair any sensible wife would have swallowed. That's what I told myself in the car." She pushed the envelope an inch closer. "And then I opened this. It came to me 2 weeks ago, from Daniel. He asked me to keep it and tell no one. I didn't open it until this morning after I read the paper." Evelyn looked at the envelope. "What is it?" "Open it," Catherine said. "You need to see what my son was truly planning, because it was worse than an affair, Evelyn. It was worse than the theft, and you deserve to know how close you came." Evelyn opened the envelope with steady hands, and inside were documents, legal documents drafted and dated, awaiting only signatures, and as she read them, the temperature of the room seemed to drop by degrees. They were divorce papers, but not ordinary ones. They were papers that named her as mentally incompetent. "He was building a case," Catherine said quietly, watching Evelyn's face as she read. "For 6 months. He'd been documenting things, little things. Times you forgot appointments he'd secretly canceled. Times you lost your temper at events where he'd provoked you privately beforehand. He had a psychiatrist, a man he paid prepared to testify that you were unstable, paranoid, unfit to manage the family trust." Her voice was flat with self-disgust. "His plan wasn't just to leave you, Evelyn. His plan was to have you declared incompetent, seize control of the trust as your legal conservator, and then take all of it, Evelyn breathed. Legally, permanently, not just the 14 million, everything. Everything, Catherine confirmed. The trust, the foundation, the Carter name, and every dollar behind it. He wasn't going to divorce you and walk away. He was going to have you locked away as a madwoman and inherit your entire family's empire while you were declared too unstable to object. She swallowed. The ball was going to be the beginning of it. That's why he wanted you there. That's why he wanted to provoke you publicly. If you'd broken down, if you'd screamed, made a scene, wept in front of 600 people the way any woman might have, he'd have had 600 witnesses to your instability. Madison, the necklace, the humiliation, it was all bait. He wanted you to snap in public so the conservatorship would sail through court unopposed. Evelyn set the papers down very slowly, and she understood at last the full shape of what she had survived. Not merely a cheating husband, not merely a thief. A man who had planned coldly and methodically over half a year to erase her, to take not just her money, but her sanity, her freedom, her very right to speak for herself, and to do it wearing the mask of a concerned husband, committing his poor, unwell wife to care for her own good. She thought about the ball, about how close she had come to giving him exactly what he wanted. If she had not made breakfast that morning, if she had wept when he slid the box across the counter, if she had screamed at the ball, made the scene he'd been counting on. I nearly gave it to him, she said softly. The morning he told me about Madison, every instinct in me wanted to scream, to throw something, to fall apart. She looked up at Catherine. I didn't, because my father taught me the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm while their world burns. I thought it was just his pride talking, old money composure. Her hand pressed flat against the papers. It wasn't pride, Catherine. It was armor. That single lesson is the only reason I'm not in a psychiatric facility right now, signing away my grandmother's life's work to the man who framed me. Catherine Whitmore stood slowly, an old woman carrying the weight of a truth no mother should ever have to carry. I gave you those papers, she said, because I need you to know that whatever you did to him last night, it was less than he'd planned to do to you. Far less. You took his freedom. He was going to take your mind. She moved toward the door, then paused. I loved my son. I will love him until I die. God help me, because that's what mothers do. We love the monsters we raise, even when we can see exactly what they are. She looked back. But I will not stand in your way, Evelyn. I came here to be your enemy. I'm leaving as something else. I don't know what, but not your enemy. A pause. Cornelia would be proud of you. I knew her, you know, long ago. She was the hardest woman I ever met and the kindest, and she never once let anyone confuse the two. You're just like her. And Catherine Whitmore let herself out, and Evelyn sat alone with the divorce papers that would have ended her, and for the first time all week alone, unwatched, with no one to be strong for, she allowed herself for exactly 90 seconds to shake. Then she stopped. She folded the papers, and she called Henry. He was going to have me committed, Evelyn said before Henry could even finish saying hello. Conservatorship. He had a psychiatrist bought and paid for. 6 months of manufactured evidence. His mother just brought me the file. There was a silence on the line, and when Henry spoke, his voice had gone to a place Evelyn had never heard from him before, cold beyond cold, the voice of a man discovering that the thing he'd been fighting was even worse than he'd believed. Send me everything, he said. Every page, the psychiatrist's name, the dates, all of it. Henry, Miss Carter. His voice was iron. Last night we prosecuted him for financial crimes, embezzlement, fraud, serious, but the kind of thing a very good lawyer might chip away at over years. A conspiracy to fraudulently commit a competent woman to seize her assets. He paused. That is not a financial crime. That is a scheme to imprison an innocent person and steal her life. Combined with a paid psychiatrist willing to file false medical testimony, that is a conspiracy that will put not only your husband but that doctor and anyone else involved away for a very long time. And it removes any sympathy a jury might have felt for a businessman who made a bad decision under pressure. His voice dropped. Juries forgive greed, Miss Carter. They do not forgive a man who tried to have his sane wife declared mad. Send me the file. Evelyn looked at the papers on the table. Send it, Henry said again, softer now. Let me finish this properly. Let me make certain that man never sees the outside of a cell in a form that could ever hurt you again. You've carried this long enough. Let an old man carry the last of it. Thank you, Henry, Evelyn said, and her voice was steady again. For everything. I mean it. It has been, Henry said, the great privilege of my life. Now send me the file and go do something for yourself today. You've earned an afternoon that isn't a battle. But there was no afternoon that wasn't a battle, because at noon the phone rang with a number Evelyn didn't recognize, and against her better judgment, she answered, and the voice on the other end made her go cold all over again. Mrs. Whitmore. A woman's voice, smooth, professional, dangerous. My name is Vivian Ashford. I represent your husband. I'm his criminal defense attorney, and I was hoping we might have a conversation before things proceed any further. A civilized one, woman to woman. Evelyn walked to the window. My husband has a lawyer already calling me at noon the day after his arrest. He works fast. He's frightened, Mrs. Whitmore. Frightened men move quickly. A pause. May I be direct? Please. Daniel is prepared to plead guilty to the financial charges. All of them. Full restitution, full cooperation, no trial, no drawn-out spectacle. He'll spare your family the years of headlines, the depositions, the public dissection of your marriage. In exchange, the lawyer's voice shifted, subtle, practiced. He asks only that certain other matters not be pursued, that certain files, should they exist, remain private, and that you consider a modest settlement. He is, after all, still your husband, and there are equitable interests in the marital estate that a court would— Ms. Ashford. Evelyn's voice was very quiet. Let me save us both some time. You're calling about the conservatorship file. The silence on the line lasted 3 full seconds. I don't know what you're referring to, the lawyer said carefully. Yes, you do. That's exactly why you called. Not the embezzlement, he was always going to plead on that. There's no defense against his own signature. You called because he told you about the conservatorship scheme, and he's terrified I have proof, and he sent you to find out whether I do before I hand it to a prosecutor. Evelyn watched the city below her calm as still water. I do, Miss Ashford. I have all of it. The manufactured incidents. The bought psychiatrist, a Dr. Reese, I believe, though you can confirm that with your client. The dated divorce filing that declares me mentally incompetent. His mother brought me the file this morning. His mother. Evelyn almost smiled. So here is my counteroffer, and it's the only one I'll make. There is no settlement. There is no private arrangement. There is no keeping certain matters quiet. That file went to my family's executor an hour ago, and by tomorrow it will be in the hands of the same federal prosecutors already handling your client's fraud. Tell Daniel that the man he hired to certify me insane is about to lose his medical license and his freedom, and that every additional day Daniel spends pretending he can negotiate his way out of this only adds to what he'll ultimately serve. She paused. And tell him one more thing. Tell him I said that the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm while their world burns. He'll know what it means. He tried to burn mine down around me, Ms. Ashford, and he was so busy watching for the flames that he never noticed I'd already walked out of the house. She hung up before the lawyer could answer. The days that followed moved fast, and Evelyn moved faster. The conservatorship file did exactly what Henry had promised it would. Dr. Reese, the psychiatrist Daniel had paid, folded within 48 hours of being contacted by federal investigators, trading everything he knew for a lighter sentence, and what he knew was damning. He had documentation of Daniel's instructions, emails, payment records, a recorded voicemail in which Daniel, careless in his certainty, had said aloud the words that would finish him. I need her declared unfit before the trust audit in January. I don't care how you get there. Make her look crazy. That's what I'm paying you for. The recording leaked. Evelyn never learned how, though she suspected Margaret's fingerprints, and it played on every news channel in the country. Daniel Whitmore's own voice instructing a doctor to fake a diagnosis so he could steal his wife's inheritance and her freedom in one stroke. Whatever sympathy had lingered for him Whatever narrative his lawyer might have built about a good man who made a bad choice under financial pressure died the moment the public heard that voicemail. He was no longer a disgraced businessman. He was a man who had tried to lock his sane wife in a psychiatric ward to rob her, and there is no rehabilitating that. Not in the papers, not in a courtroom, not anywhere. Madison Cole facing charges of her own for receiving the stolen necklace, and for her months of knowing complicity, made the only smart move left to her. She cooperated completely. She turned over everything, every message, every recording, every scrap of the affair, and in doing so, she buried Daniel deeper than any prosecutor could have. It turned out the girl had been documenting him the entire time, gathering evidence for her own eventual play, and all of it now belonged to the government. She would still face consequences, but she'd walk out someday older and wiser, and permanently marked, having learned the lesson Evelyn had promised her at the ball, that ambition and strength are not the same thing, and that tying yourself to a sinking ship does not make you the captain. Through all of it, Evelyn did not gloat. She gave no interviews. She let the facts speak, and the facts were merciless, and she understood something her grandmother had taught her long ago without ever saying it in words, that true power never needs to raise its voice, because true power has already arranged the room so that it doesn't have to. 3 weeks after the ball, Evelyn stood in the same grand hall of the Metropolitan Museum where it had all detonated, and this time there were no cameras, no crowd, no armor. Just her and Henry and Margaret, and a small gathering of the Foundation's board there to formalize what the city had already understood. Evelyn Carter was assuming full control of the Carter Family Trust and its foundation. "The board is unanimous," said Robert, the former Treasury Secretary, now the chairman of the Foundation's Advisory Council. "It was frankly never in doubt. After what you did, the clarity of it, the restraint of it, there's not a person in this city who'd question your right to lead this family." He smiled. "Your grandmother chaired this foundation for 30 years and built it into the most respected philanthropic institution on the East Coast. We've all wondered since she passed whether anyone could truly fill that chair." He gestured to the seat at the head of the long table. "We stopped wondering 3 weeks ago. Sit down, Evelyn. It's yours. It was always going to be yours." And Evelyn Carter walked to the head of the table where 4 generations of her family had sat before her, and she rested her hand on the back of the chair, and for a moment she did not sit. She stood, and she looked at the empty seat, and she thought about a dying woman gripping her hand and warning her about a wolf. "My grandmother told me something once," she said quietly to the room. "She said I had a soft heart, and that softness was a beautiful thing, but that one day a wolf would come for everything she'd built, and on that day I'd have to choose whether I was a soft woman or a Carter. She said I couldn't be both." Evelyn's hand tightened on the chair. "I spent 9 years believing she was warning me to become hard, to kill the softness in myself. I thought that was the lesson." She looked up, and her eyes were clear. "I was wrong. The wolf came and I faced him, and I did not become hard to do it. I stayed soft all the way through. I made him breakfast the morning I destroyed him because part of me still grieved the man I'd married. I grieve him still." Her voice steadied. "My grandmother was wrong about one thing and only one. You can be both. You have to be both. The softness is what makes you worth protecting. The strength is what does the protecting." She thought I'd have to choose, but the choosing was never the point. The point was learning to be soft enough to love and strong enough to survive being betrayed for it. And she sat. The chair fit her the way it had fit her grandmother, the way it had fit her father, the way a thing fits when it has finally come home to the hands it was made for. Margaret Sinclair across the table wiped one quick tear and pretended she hadn't. Henry Caldwell, standing by the window, bowed his head as though in the presence of something sacred. And Evelyn Carter, no longer a wife, no longer anyone's overlooked and underestimated afterthought, took up the pen and signed her name at the head of a document that made official what an entire city had watched become true on the night of the Crescent Moon Ball. She was the head of the family now. She had walked into the fire her husband built, and she had walked out carrying everything that mattered, and she had not lost her heart in the doing of it, which was, she understood now, the only victory that had ever been worth winning. Outside, the city went on loud and hungry and endlessly turning. But inside that hall, in the quiet at the head of the long table, a woman in a plain dark dress with no armor and no audience closed her eyes for just a moment, and she said so softly that only she could hear it, "I chose grandmother. I chose all of it. And you were right, and you were wrong, and I love you, and it's done." Then she opened her eyes, and she got to work. But the work she was about to learn had only just changed shape. Because at 4 o'clock that same afternoon, as Evelyn was leaving the museum, her phone rang with Henry's number, and the moment she answered, she knew something was wrong. Henry Caldwell did not call twice in one day. Henry Caldwell did not call unless it mattered. "Miss Carter," he said, "where are you?" "Leaving the museum. Why?" "Henry, what's happened?" "I need you to come to my office now, not the penthouse, my office. And Miss Carter." A pause waited. "Don't speak to anyone on your way here. Not the press, not the board, no one." "Henry, you're frightening me. Tell me what's wrong." "It's about the trust," Henry said. "It's about your father." Another pause longer, and when he spoke again, his voice had cracked in a way she'd never heard from the old man in 40 years. "There's something in the founding documents I never told you. Something your grandmother made me swear to keep until you'd proven yourself ready. And Miss Carter," he drew a breath, "after last night, after everything you did, I think the time has come. But you need to be sitting down when I tell you. Come to my office, please." The line went dead. And Evelyn Carter, who had spent 3 weeks believing the war was over, stood on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum with her heart pounding and understood that her grandmother had left one more secret waiting in the dark. Henry's office was on the 41st floor of a building the Carter family had owned since before Evelyn was born, and when she walked in, he was standing at the window with his back to her, a single-file folder on the desk between them, and he did not turn around when she entered. "Sit down, Miss Carter." "Henry, please, sit." She sat. The folder was old. She could see that even from across the desk. The paper had yellowed at the edges, and the label was written in a hand she recognized instantly because she had spent her childhood watching that hand sign birthday cards and holiday letters, and once a will that changed everything. Her grandmother's handwriting. "What is this?" Evelyn said quietly. Henry finally turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked for the first time in all the years she'd known him genuinely old. "Your grandmother did not trust your father," he said. Evelyn went still. "What?" "She loved him. He was her son. But she did not trust him, not with the full weight of what she'd built, not entirely. And she was right not to, though. It took me years to understand why." Henry lowered himself into his chair slowly, an old man handling old grief. "Your father was a good man, in most ways, Miss Carter. But he was weak in one. He gambled. Not cards worse. He gambled on people. He trusted men he shouldn't have again and again because he wanted so badly to be liked. And your grandmother saw it. She saw that if she handed him unrestricted control of everything, some smiling wolf would eventually talk him out of it piece by piece." Henry's hand rested on the folder. "So she built a second layer into the trust, a hidden one, a provision that even your father never fully understood, and that Daniel could not have found no matter how long he searched, because it wasn't written into the documents he had access to. It was written into these." He pushed the folder across the desk. "The co-trustee clause," Evelyn breathed. "The one that let Daniel sign. My father added that you said." "Your father thought he added it," Henry said. "In truth, your grandmother wrote it and let him believe it was his idea because she wanted a trap in the machine. A door that looked like a weakness but was actually a lock. Any co-trustee who moved capital improperly, who took a single dollar he wasn't entitled to, didn't just commit a crime, Miss Carter. He triggered an automatic and irrevocable forfeiture of every claim, marital or otherwise, against the entire Carter estate." Henry's eyes met hers. "Your grandmother built a trap 60 years ago for a wolf she knew would come someday. She didn't know his name, she didn't know his face, but she knew he would come because wolves always do, and she made certain that the moment he reached for the family's throat, he would forfeit everything by the very act of reaching." Evelyn opened the folder with trembling hands. And there it was in her grandmother's own handwriting, dated the year Evelyn was born, a provision so quietly ruthless that it took her breath away. Daniel had not merely committed fraud when he moved that $14 million. He had, in the same instant, by the plain terms of a clause written before he was ever born, forfeited any right to contest the divorce, any claim to the marital estate, any standing to challenge her control of anything. His lawyer's talk of equitable interests in the marital estate was worthless. It had been worthless since the second he signed the first transfer. He had walked into a trap a dead woman had set for him decades before they'd ever met. She knew, Evelyn whispered, 60 years ago, she knew someone like him would come. She knew someone like him always comes, Henry said gently, for families like yours. She used to tell me the money is not the target, Henry. The money is only bait. The target is always the woman who guards it, because a man who wants everything knows that the fastest way to take it is to take her. Break her, discredit her, remove her, and the fortune falls into his hands like fruit off a shaken tree. Henry's voice thickened. Your grandmother spent her whole life being underestimated by men who thought a woman couldn't possibly be the real power behind the Carter name. She let them believe it. And then she buried them one by one with traps they never saw, and she wrote this family's protection into the bones of the trust so that her granddaughter would never have to be broken to keep what was hers. Evelyn closed the folder, and she understood at last the fullest shape of the inheritance she'd received, not the money, not the necklace, not the name, but this, a grandmother who had reached forward across 60 years and death itself to leave a shield waiting in the dark for a granddaughter she trusted to be strong enough to need it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Evelyn said softly. If I'd known the night of the ball, I could have. Because she made me swear I wouldn't, Henry said. She told me, don't hand it to her, Henry. Make her earn it. Make her walk into the fire believing she has only her own two hands and her own wits, because a woman who is handed a shield never learns whether she could have survived without one. And a Carter must always know. Henry's eyes were wet now openly. You didn't need this provision to defeat him, Miss Carter. You defeated him with the signatures and the strategy and the raw nerve to descend that staircase without knowing for certain you'd win. This, he tapped the folder. This was only ever meant to be the thing you found afterward, the proof that she believed in you before she ever met the woman you'd become. She left it as a message. And the message is, I knew you'd be enough. I knew it the year you were born. And Evelyn Carter, who had not wept through the affair or the theft or the ball or the arrest or the conservatorship file or any of it, Evelyn Carter put her face in her hands at last and wept in the office of the old man who had guarded her family for 40 years, for the grandmother who had believed in her from across the veil of 6 decades and death. That night alone in the penthouse, Evelyn did the thing she had been putting off for 3 weeks. She went into the vault. Not the small safe in Daniel's office, the real vault, the one built into the foundation of the penthouse when her grandmother first bought it, the one Daniel had never known existed because Evelyn had never told him, because some part of her, even in the earliest and happiest days of the marriage, had kept one door in the house locked against him. She had never examined that instinct too closely. Now she understood it. It was the same instinct her grandmother had built into the trust. The instinct of Carter women passed down like eye color to always keep one thing back, to never hand a man the whole of yourself because the whole of yourself is exactly what a certain kind of man will take. She spun the dial and opened the heavy door, and inside, on a velvet stand, sat the ocean's tear, the real one. Because that was the last secret, the one not even Henry knew, the one Evelyn had kept entirely to herself. The necklace Daniel had stolen and given to Madison, the one that had blazed at the girl's throat at the ball, the one that had fallen and skittered across the marble floor, that had been a replica. A perfect one commissioned by Evelyn's grandmother decades ago, precisely so that the real ocean's tear could rest safe in the dark, while its twin took the risks of the world. Cornelia Carter had never once worn the genuine necklace in public. She wore the copy to the hospital opening to her husband's funeral to the day Evelyn was born. The real one had never left the vault, and Evelyn had known. She had known the moment she saw it on Madison's throat at the ball. She had known when she picked the fallen necklace off the floor and murmured hello again to it, and let the whole city believe she'd recovered her grandmother's priceless heirloom, when in truth, the priceless heirloom had never been in danger at all, had been sitting here in the dark the entire time waiting. Daniel had thought he was stealing the crown jewel of the Carter family. He had stolen a beautiful, worthless twin and never known the difference because he had never once looked closely enough at anything that belonged to his wife to see what it truly was. That was the whole of him, Evelyn thought, standing before the vault. That was the whole tragedy of Daniel Whitmore distilled into a single object. He had spent 11 years married to a woman he never bothered to see clearly, and so he had mistaken the copy for the original in every possible way, mistaken her calm for weakness, her softness for foolishness, her patience for defeat. He had reached for the glittering surface of things and never understood that everything real, everything that actually mattered, had been kept safe in a place he was never permitted to enter. Evelyn reached out and touched the real ocean's tear, the one her grandmother had worn against her skin, the one that carried 60 years of the only kind of legacy that couldn't be stolen. And she thought about all of it, the empty velvet box. That's the best part. The girl who wanted to watch the Ice Queen break the staircase, the arrest, the conservatorship, the trap 60 years in the making, and a dead woman's faith reaching across time to say, "I knew you'd be enough." "You were right, grandmother," she said softly, to the necklace, to the vault, to the memory. "About the wolf, about all of it, except that you were wrong to worry." She lifted the real ocean's tear from its stand and held it up, and it caught the low light and threw it back warm and deep and ancient. "You didn't need to protect me. You raised me. That was always enough." And Evelyn Carter fastened the true ocean's tear around her own throat for the first time in her life. Not for cameras, not for a room, not for an audience of anyone, but alone in the dark for herself and for the woman who had believed in her from the year she was born. Then she closed the vault. And she did not walk away as a wife or a victim or the underestimated afterthought of a smaller man's ambition. She walked away as the architect of everything that came next. The trial of Daniel Whitmore began on a Monday in October, and by the time it was over, it would change the way the entire city thought about power and about the quiet women who are so often mistaken for the furniture in a powerful man's house. Evelyn had not wanted a trial. She had offered him through Henry a path to spare them both. The years of it plead to everything, accept the sentence and let the whole thing end quietly. But Daniel even ruined facing the recording of his own voice, instructing a doctor to fake her madness, could not accept that he had lost. Men like Daniel Whitmore never can. Losing quietly is a skill that must be learned in childhood, and Daniel had been raised to win. And so he did the thing that would ultimately cost him the last shred of mercy the world had left for him. He fought. "He's going to trial," Henry told her the morning the news came through. His lawyer advised against it. Vivian Ashford is not a foolish woman, and she knows this case cannot be won. But Daniel insisted. He believes, Henry paused, choosing the words carefully. He believes that if he can get you on a witness stand, he can break you. He thinks the whole thing turns on you. He thinks that if he can make you look cold enough, calculating enough, vindictive enough, a jury might see a scheming wife who destroyed a man over an affair rather than a criminal who tried to have his wife committed to steal her fortune. Evelyn set down her coffee. "So his defense is that I'm the villain." "His defense," Henry said grimly, "is you. That's the entire strategy. Put Evelyn Carter on the stand and take her apart. Make the jury dislike you enough to forgive him." He looked at her. "You'll have to testify. There's no avoiding it. He's built his whole case around cross-examining you, and if you refuse, it looks like you're hiding something. You'll have to sit in that chair and let his lawyer come at you for as long as she wants, and you'll have to stay calm through every second of it. Because the moment you lose your composure, the moment you snap, you hand them the exact image they need." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "He's still trying to do it," she said softly. "Even now, even from a cell, he's still trying to make me break in public. That was always the plan, wasn't it? At the ball, he wanted me to snap in front of 600 people so the conservatorship would sail through. And now he wants me to snap in front of a jury so the acquittal will." She almost laughed. "It's the same trap, Henry. He's setting the exact same trap. He learned nothing. No, Henry agreed. He learned nothing. But that, Miss Carter, is precisely why you'll win, because you learned everything. The prosecution called their witnesses first, and it was a slow, methodical dismantling of Daniel Whitmore's life. Dr. Reese testified for 2 full days, and it was devastating. He sat in the witness chair, a broken man who had traded his career for a lighter sentence, and he told the jury everything: how Daniel had approached him 8 months before the ball, how he had offered him money to document a series of manufactured mental health incidents, how he had been instructed to prepare testimony declaring Evelyn Carter paranoid, unstable, and unfit to manage her family's affairs. He told me it needed to be ready before January. Dr. Reese said, his voice flat with self-loathing. Before the annual trust audit. He said, the doctor swallowed. He said that once she was declared incompetent and he was named her conservator, he'd have full control of the trust and no one would ever question a husband caring for his poor, unwell wife. And did the defendant ever express concern for his wife's actual well-being? The prosecutor asked. In any of your conversations? Dr. Reese looked at the floor. No, he said. Not once. She was never a patient to him. She was an obstacle. He spoke about her the way a man speaks about a lock he's trying to pick. The recording played next. The whole courtroom listened to Daniel Whitmore's own voice fill the silence. I need her declared unfit before the trust audit in January. I don't care how you get there. Make her look crazy. That's what I'm paying you for. And Evelyn, sitting in the gallery, watched the faces of the jurors change, watched them look from the speaker to the man at the defense table, and she saw the exact moment that 12 ordinary people stopped seeing a fallen businessman and started seeing something colder. Daniel sat through it with his jaw clenched, and only once he turned in his chair and found Evelyn's eyes across the courtroom. And there was such raw hatred in his face that a lesser woman might have flinched. Evelyn did not flinch. She met his gaze and held it calm as still water until he was the one who looked away. That was the thing he could never forgive, she understood. Not that she had beaten him, that she had never once been afraid of him. From the empty velvet box to the witness stand, through all of it, she had never given him the fear he needed to feel powerful. And a man like Daniel Whitmore would rather be hated than be nothing at all. But Evelyn had given him the one thing worse than either. She had given him irrelevance. Then it was her turn. They called Evelyn Carter to the stand on a Thursday morning, and the courtroom was packed and every reporter in the city was there, and the whole thing came down, as everyone had known it would, to whether one woman could sit in a chair and keep her composure while a skilled attorney tried for as long as it took to make her lose it. Vivian Ashford rose slowly. She was good, Evelyn had known she would be. She was elegant and unhurried, and she smiled as she approached the warm, professional smile of a predator who has done this 100 times. Mrs. Whitmore, she began. Carter, Evelyn corrected gently. I no longer use his name. Of course, Ms. Carter. Ashford's smile widened a fraction. You'll forgive the slip. It's only that you were married to my client for 11 years. That's a long time to share a name, a long time to share a life. Wouldn't you agree? It was a long time, Evelyn said. And in all those 11 years, you never once suspected your husband of any wrongdoing, never noticed the money, the travel, the... Ashford gestured vaguely. The signs a wife might notice. I trusted him, Evelyn said simply. I know how that sounds now, but I trusted him. That's what a marriage is, Ms. Ashford. You give someone the benefit of the doubt for years because the alternative is to live beside a person you're constantly investigating, and that isn't a marriage. That's a surveillance operation. A soft ripple of something moved through the jury. I trusted him until the morning he gave me a reason not to, and then I stopped. The morning you found the messages. The morning he told me he'd given my grandmother's necklace to another woman, over coffee, in our kitchen. He slid the empty box across the counter and told me to cancel the insurance. And that made you angry. It made me clear, Evelyn said. There's a difference. Ashford paced a slow half-circle. You're a very composed woman, Ms. Carter. Everyone remarks on it. Cool, calm, controlled. Some might even say cold. She let the words sit. Is it fair to say you're not a woman who feels things very deeply? And there it was, the first real strike, the opening of the whole strategy, the attempt to paint her as the ice queen, the calculating woman who'd destroyed a man without feeling. Evelyn had known it was coming. She had rehearsed a dozen careful answers with Henry, and in the moment, she used none of them. "My grandmother gave me that necklace the day I was born," Evelyn said quietly. "She told me she put it on so that the first beautiful thing I ever saw would be something that would outlast her. She died 9 years ago, and I have grieved her every single day since. And the morning your client told me he'd handed her legacy to a stranger to wear like a costume, I went into a bathroom and I put my hand over my mouth so that he wouldn't hear me, and I made a sound I have never made before or since." She looked directly at the jury now, not at Ashford. "So no, Ms. Ashford, it is not fair to say I don't feel things deeply. It is fair to say that I learned a very long time ago that a woman who shows a certain kind of man exactly where her heart is has just handed him the map to where the knife goes. I feel things deeply. I simply stopped letting your client see it. He taught me to." The courtroom was silent. Vivian Ashford, to her credit, did not miss a beat. "So you admit you concealed your true feelings from your husband. You presented a calm exterior while in fact you were planning his destruction." "I presented a calm exterior," Evelyn agreed, "while your client was in fact planning to have me declared insane and locked away so he could steal my family's fortune. You've heard the recording, Ms. Ashford. Everyone in this room has heard it. I concealed my feelings from a man who was at that very moment paying a doctor to manufacture evidence that I had none worth respecting." She tilted her head. "If you'd like to have a conversation about who was concealing what from whom in that marriage, I'm happy to have it. But I don't think it's a conversation that ends well for your client." A juror in the second row actually nodded. Ashford changed tack because a good lawyer knows when a line of attack is dead. "Let's talk about the night of the charity ball. You orchestrated a very public spectacle, didn't you? You could have handled all of this privately. Divorce, quiet legal proceedings. Instead, you chose to expose my client in front of 600 people with cameras rolling in the most humiliating way imaginable. Why? Because he was going to do the same to me. That's speculation." "It's the recording," Evelyn said. "The plan was always to break me in public. The ball was his stage, Ms. Ashford, not mine. He chose it. He told me he was skipping it so I'd relax. He brought Madison to debut her in front of the whole city while I stood at the door. He wanted me to snap in public so his conservatorship petition would have 600 witnesses to my instability." She held Ashford's eyes. "I didn't orchestrate a spectacle. I walked onto the stage your client had already built to destroy me, and I performed a different play than the one he'd written. That's not orchestration. That's survival. There's a difference, and I'd think a woman in your profession would know it better than most." It went on for 3 hours, and Vivian Ashford tried everything. She tried to make Evelyn look vindictive, and Evelyn answered with grief. She tried to make her look calculating, and Evelyn answered with a plain recitation of facts that made the calculation look like nothing more than a woman refusing to drown. She tried near the end, the cruelest thing of all. She brought up the marriage itself, the early years, the happiness, and tried to suggest that a woman capable of turning so completely against a man she'd once loved must have a coldness at her core that the jury should fear. "You loved him once," Ashford said. "Didn't you truly loved him?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "And now you've destroyed him utterly. His company, his freedom, his name. How does a woman go from loving a man to destroying him so completely? What kind of person is capable of that?" And Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. And when she answered, her voice was not cold at all. It was the most human thing anyone in that courtroom had heard all day. "I didn't destroy him because I stopped loving him," she said. "I destroyed him because I finally understood that the man I loved never actually existed. I loved a performance, Ms. Ashford. 11 years of a very good performance. The real Daniel Whitmore, the one who slid that box across the counter, the one who hired Dr. Reese, the one whose voice you all heard on that recording. I never loved him because I never met him, because he made very sure I never did until the day he decided he didn't need to pretend anymore." She looked at the man at the defense table, and there was no hatred in it, only a terrible final clarity. "You asked what kind of person is capable of destroying someone they loved. The answer is none. I didn't destroy someone I loved. I defended myself against someone I'd been tricked into loving. And I would do it again, every single step. because the alternative was to let him win. And I have a family name to protect, and children who will never know that name to protect, and a grandmother who reached across 60 years and death itself to make sure I'd be strong enough to do exactly what I did. She turned back to Ashford. You wanted me to break on this stand. That was the whole plan, wasn't it? Get her up here, make her crack, show the jury the crazy woman your client always said she was. Evelyn folded her hands. I'm sorry to disappoint you both, but I broke a long time ago, Ms. Ashford. I broke in a bathroom the morning he gave away my grandmother's necklace with my hand over my mouth. And when I put myself back together, I put myself back together as something that doesn't break anymore. Your client did that, not me. Every hard thing you see in this chair he built. He should have been more careful about what he was making. Oh, I saw Vivian Ashford looked at her for a long moment. Then she said quietly, No further questions, Your Honor. And she sat down because there was nothing left to ask. The strategy had been to break her, and she had not broken. And without that, there was no defense at all, only a man on a recording paying a doctor to fake his wife's madness, and a jury that had just watched that wife prove beyond any possible doubt exactly how sane she was. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty, on every count. The embezzlement, the fraud against his investors, the conspiracy to fraudulently commit Evelyn, all of it. Every charge guilty. When the foreman read it, Daniel Whitmore did not react at all at first, as though the words were in a language he didn't speak. And then slowly, it reached him. And Evelyn watched from the gallery as the last of the man she'd married collapsed inward. And for one moment, one single moment, she felt not triumph, but a deep and weary sorrow for the 11 years for the wedding gown, for the young man who'd once called her father Sir, with genuine nerves for everything that might have been if he had only been at his core a different kind of man. Then the moment passed. Because he turned as they were leading him out, and he found her in the gallery one last time, and whatever softness had been in her face, whatever grief he saw it, and he mistook it, as he had mistaken everything about her, for 11 years for weakness. You'll regret this, he said loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear his composure finally fully gone. You think you've won? You think this is over? I made you Evelyn. Everything you are, you got from being my wife. Without me, you're nothing. You're a scared little girl hiding behind a dead woman's money. You'll be alone for the rest of your life, and every night you'll lie awake in that penthouse knowing what you did to me, and it will eat you alive. And you'll finally understand that you're the monster here, not me, not me. The bailiffs moved to take him, and Evelyn Carter rose from the gallery bench slowly, and she looked at the man she had once promised to love until death, and she gave him at last the only thing she had left to give him. The truth. You didn't make me Daniel, she said, and her voice carried through the silent courtroom like something carved from stone. You're the one who's confused about who made whom. I made you. My family's money built your company. My grandmother's name opened every door you ever walked through. The connections, the capital, the credibility, every bit of it came from me, and you spent 11 years telling yourself it came from you, because a man like you cannot survive believing he owes his entire life to a woman he never bothered to see. She stepped toward him, and she was not afraid, and everyone in that room could feel it. You said I'll be alone. Maybe I will. But I'll be alone as myself in my own house, with my own name guarding the things my grandmother trusted me to guard. And you'll be alone in a cell having lost everything. And here is the part you'll never understand. The part that will actually eat you alive. I will not spend a single night thinking about you. Not one. Because you were never the great love of my life, Daniel. You were the mistake I survived. And there is a very great difference between the two, and you will have a very long time to think about it. They led him out. The doors closed, and Evelyn Carter turned and walked out of the courtroom into the flashing cameras of 100 reporters, and she did not answer a single question, and she did not smile for a single photograph. And she got into the car where Henry and Margaret were waiting, and only then, in the private dark of the back seat with the doors closed and the city sliding by, did she finally let out the breath she felt she'd been holding for 6 months. It's over, Margaret said softly, taking her hand. Evelyn, it's actually over. It's over, Evelyn agreed. And Henry Caldwell, 71 years old, who had served 3 generations of Carters and loved them all, looked at the fourth and last of them and said with a catch in his voice, "Your grandmother would have stood in that courtroom and applauded Miss Carter. Every word. She spent her whole life waiting to see if the family would produce one more like her. And it did. God help the world it did." The months that followed were quiet, and the quiet Evelyn discovered was the hardest part. Because a war gives you something to do. A war fills every hour with strategy and stakes and the clean, cold clarity of an enemy to defeat. And when the war ends, when the enemy is behind bars and the fortune is recovered and the name is safe, what's left is the thing you never had time to feel while you were fighting. The grief. It came for her in ordinary moments. In the kitchen one morning, reaching for 2 coffee cups out of habit, before remembering there was only one person in the penthouse now. In the closet, finding one of his ties that the movers had missed. In the silence of the vast rooms at night, the silence she'd once shared with a man she'd believed she'd grow old beside. She had told the courtroom the truth, that she'd loved a performance that the real Daniel had never existed, and that was true, and it did not make it hurt any less because you can grieve a performance. You can grieve 11 years even when you learn they were built on sand. The years were still real. The love had still been real on her side, even if it had landed on a man who was never there to receive it. Margaret found her one evening sitting alone in the dark of the living room, not crying, just sitting, and she came in without a word and sat down beside her and took her hand, and for a long while neither of them spoke. "You did the right thing," Margaret said finally. "You know that." "I know," Evelyn said. "That's not what's hard." "Then what is?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "That I have to grieve him," she said. "That I'm allowed to. I keep thinking I shouldn't be sad. He tried to have me declared insane, Margaret. He tried to steal everything. I should feel nothing but relief. But I sit here at night, and I miss—" Her voice caught. "I miss the person I thought he was. I miss the marriage I thought I had. I miss being someone's wife, even a liar's wife, because at least the mornings had 2 coffee cups in them." She wiped her eyes, once quickly the old reflex. "Is that weak after everything? To sit here missing a man who tried to destroy me?" "No," Margaret said fiercely. "God, no. It's the opposite of weak. Do you know what would be weak, Evelyn? To have come through all of this with a heart so hardened that you felt nothing at all. That's what he wanted you to become. That's what he accused you of being on that stand, cold, unfeeling, incapable of love. And if you'd let yourself turn into that, he'd have won the only battle that actually mattered." She squeezed her hand hard. "You beat him in the courtroom. But you beat him for real right here, right now, sitting in the dark, missing a marriage you know was a lie because it means he never managed to kill the part of you that could love. That part survived. He threw everything he had at it, and it survived. And that's the whole victory, darling. That's the only victory that was ever worth anything." And Evelyn Carter put her head on her oldest friend's shoulder and wept at last for the marriage she'd lost, and the man who'd never existed, and the 11 years she'd given to a performance, and she let herself feel every bit of it, because Margaret was right, because the feeling was the proof that she'd won. Spring came, and with it, slowly, something new. Evelyn threw herself into the foundation. She was extraordinary at it, everyone said so, though she'd stopped caring what everyone said. She restructured the trust with Henry, closing every loophole, sealing every door, building the protections even higher so that no future wolf would ever again find a way in. She funded the children's wing her grandmother had always dreamed of and never quite finished, and she named it not for Cornelia, but simply the Cornelia Wing, because her grandmother had never liked her name in lights, and Evelyn honored that. And she became, without ever intending to, something the city had not seen since Cornelia Carter herself, a woman of unquestioned power who wielded it entirely for others. Not a socialite, not a philanthropist in the tax benefit sense. A force. When Evelyn Carter picked up the phone, senators answered. When she decided a hospital would be built, it was built. When she looked at a broken institution and decided to fix it, it got fixed. She had walked into the fire her husband built as a wife, And she had walked out as one of the most powerful women in New York, and she had done it without ever once raising her voice, because her grandmother had taught her that the loudest person in the room is almost never the one who actually controls it. The other women noticed. That was the thing Evelyn had not expected. Women began to come to her quietly, privately, the way people come to someone who has survived a thing they're still trapped inside. Women in marriages that had started to feel like surveillance operations. Women who'd been made small in kitchens and hallways in ways too subtle for anyone else to see. Women who'd been told one way or another to smile and welcome the thing that was replacing them. They came to Evelyn Carter because the whole city had watched her descend a staircase in obsidian silk and reclaim everything a man had tried to take, and they wanted to know how. And Evelyn told them every time the same thing. "He'll tell you that you're nothing without him," she'd say, "that everything you are came from him, that you'll be alone and it will destroy you. He'll tell you that your softness is a weakness, and your calm is coldness, and your patience is defeat. And here is what I need you to understand. Every single one of those is a lie designed to make you hand him the knife. The softness is your strength, the calm is your armor, the patience is your weapon, and you are never, ever nothing." As she'd take their hands the way Eleanor had taken hers, the way Margaret had taken hers in the dark. Stay calm while your world burns, not because you don't feel it, because you feel it so completely that you refuse to let him see it and use it against you. And then when the moment comes, and it will come, you walk out of the house before the flames reach you, and you take everything that was ever truly yours, and you never look back. That's not revenge. Revenge is loud. This is something better. This is survival done so well, it looks like victory. It became in time a kind of quiet legend in the circles that mattered. The woman who outshone the mistress at the charity ball. The billionaire's wife who turned out to be the billionaire all along. But Evelyn never told the story that way because that wasn't the story that mattered to her. The story that mattered to her was smaller and truer, a grandmother's faith, a lesson about staying calm, and a heart that survived everything thrown at it. There was one more thing at the very end. Almost a year to the day after the ball, Evelyn received a letter. It came through Henry, forwarded from the prison, and she almost didn't open it. She held it for a long time, this last thread, connecting her to the man she'd married, and part of her wanted to burn it unread. But in the end, she opened it because she had learned that the only way past a thing is through it, and she had never once in the whole ordeal chosen to look away from anything. It was short. It was, she suspected, the first honest thing Daniel Whitmore had ever written to her. "Evelyn," it read, "I've had a great deal of time to think in here, more than I ever wanted, and I've spent most of it hating you, which was easier than the alternative. But the hate ran out a few weeks ago, the way everything runs out eventually in a place like this. And what's underneath it is worse. What's underneath it is that you were right. In the courtroom, you said I never loved you because I never met you, because I made sure I never did. I've turned that over 1,000 times, and I keep arriving at the same place, which is that it's true, and that I did it on purpose, because some part of me always knew that if I ever really looked at you, really saw who you were, I'd have understood that you were the better person in every possible way, and I couldn't live beside that. So I made you small in my mind year after year so that I could keep believing I was the one who mattered. And then one day I believed it so completely that I slid an empty box across the counter and thought you'd just take it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't. But I wanted you to know that I finally see you, Evelyn. Too late to matter. But I see you. You were never nothing. You were everything, and I was too much of a coward to survive knowing it. D. Evelyn read it twice, and then she folded it carefully, and she did not cry, and she did not feel triumph, and she did not feel the old grief either. She felt for the first time in a year something like peace, the strange, quiet peace of a wound that is finally closed, that will always leave a scar, but will never bleed again. She thought about writing back. She sat with a pen for a while, and in the end she wrote only one line and she sent it, and it was the last communication that would ever pass between Evelyn Carter and Daniel Whitmore. "I know," she wrote. "I always knew. That was the difference between us. E." Then she put down the pen, and she never thought of him again in the way a woman thinks of a man who still has any hold on her heart. He became exactly as she'd told him he would in that courtroom. The mistake she survived, a closed chapter in a book that had a great many chapters still to be written. On the anniversary of her grandmother's death, Evelyn went to the vault one last time in the way that mattered. She opened the heavy door and she took out the real Ocean's Tear, the true one, the one that had never left the dark, and she held it in her palm the way she'd held it the night she first understood the whole shape of what her grandmother had built. And she thought about all of it, the empty box, the staircase, the trial, the letter, the trap, 60 years in the making, the faith of a dead woman reaching across time to say, "I knew you'd be enough." "It's done, grandmother," she said softly to the necklace, to the vault, to the memory that had guided her through every dark hour of the hardest year of her life. "The wolf came, and I faced him, and I won, and I didn't lose myself doing it. You were afraid I'd have to choose between being soft and being a Carter. I didn't have to choose. I was both. I was both the whole way through, and that's why I'm still standing, and that's why the family is safe. And that's why I can hold this necklace with a whole heart instead of a broken one." She lifted it, and the light caught it, warm and deep and ancient, 60 years of legacy that no man had ever managed to steal, because the women who guarded it had always been stronger than the men who reached for it. "You raised me right. You believed in me before you ever met the woman I'd become, and you were right to. I want you to know you were right to. And Evelyn Carter fastened the true Ocean's Tear around her own throat, alone in the dark, for no audience but herself and the grandmother who had believed in her from the year she was born. Then she closed the vault, and she walked out into the light of the penthouse she had reclaimed, in the name she had defended, with the fortune she had guarded, and the foundation she had built, and the power she had earned, and the heart she had against everything managed to keep whole. She was not the billionaire's wife. She had never really been that, though it had taken a fire to teach her so. She was Evelyn Carter, head of one of the oldest families in New York, guardian of a legacy 60 years deep, and the architect of everything that came next. She had been handed an empty box and told to smile, and she had answered by becoming the most powerful woman in the city. The wolf had come for everything she loved, exactly as her grandmother had warned. He had reached for her throat and her name and her sanity and her whole inheritance, so certain that a quiet woman would simply let herself be taken. He had been wrong about her from the very first day to the very last, and it had cost him everything he had. Because in the end, it is never the loudest person in the room who wins. It is never the one who slides the empty box across the counter, so sure of his own power. It is the quiet one, the patient one, the one who stays calm while her whole world burns and walks out of the house before the flames can reach her, and takes back every single thing that was always only and forever hers. It is the one who understands, as Evelyn Carter came to understand, that true power never needs to raise its voice. It simply closes the vault and walks away and lets the silence say everything. Evelyn Carter walked away, and she never once looked back.